Enforcement and Compounding Committee of the State Board of Pharmacy. Welcome. We will establish quorum. Valerie, do you want to start out?
Sure. Valerie Munoz, public member.
Stan Weiser, professional member.
Alan Shad, professional member.
Amy Gutierrez, professional member. Are there any public comments on items that are not on the agenda or agenda items for future meetings? If so, if you would come up, we have 2 microphones here, and if you could introduce yourself. Good morning.
Good morning.
Make sure the green light's on right there, please.
Will do.
Yes.
I'm John Gray from Keck Medical Center of USC. And I'd like to request the addition of an agenda item to the next appropriate board meeting. Section 1735.6E in Article 4.5 of Division 17 of Title 16 of California Code of Regulations states that hazardous drug compounding shall be completed in an externally vented, physically separate room. Based on recent sterile compounding license inspections and personal conversations with board inspectors, it is evident that the board is interpreting this regulation to mean that hazardous drug compounding shall be completed in an externally vented, physically separate room, which is separately vented from the room's primary engineering control. In practice, depending upon the characteristics of the negative pressure room and the biological safety cabinets within that room, it's possible to meet the room performance requirements described in Section 1735.6E1 and 2 and 1735.1E2 by externally exhausting the room air through the grill in front of the BSC, which is manufactured, tested, and certified for that specific purpose. I'd like to request that the board review the actual language and its current interpretation of 1735.6E. In doing so, I would encourage the board to recognize that external venting of a negative pressure room for hazardous drug preparation via a Class 2 Type A2 BSC is not a threat to patient or employee safety and is one appropriate mechanism to meet the external venting requirements described in 1735.6E.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can we get a copy of your written statement?
Yes, of course.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Who should I give it to?
I'll go over to Laura.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you.
How about a picture?
A picture?
I can do that. A picture of that. I think that you make a physical description there, and I'm trying to picture it
Oh,
as you describe it.
Sure.
And for, just so we can see exactly what you mean.
Submit it, yeah.
Sure. So, can I get Laura's
Laura,
information?
yeah.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you. Good morning.
good morning, everybody. I'm Douglas Barcon, and I'm here not as part of CSHP, but I am on the Council of Professional Affairs with them. And I came across something a few days ago, actually, that's not on the agenda. It's a totally different animal, basically. I'm assuming the board is aware of this, but if not, they will be now. There is a bill currently in the legislature, AB 443 for optometry. It was amended on May 2nd, introduced on February 13th of this year, and they're trying to amend Section 3093 in different sections within that to, in Section 2, Section 341, it shows here, of the BNP, that they're trying to get optometrists to be able to do immunizations for flu vaccine, herpes zoster, and pneumococcus. And that's going to be a regulation that's going to require the optometrists to go through the same CDC training that pharmacists go through and meet all the criteria. And including basic life support and the reporting and the whole situation. And I'm not sure whether that's good or bad, what the board stand on it's going to be. I know it'll improve access, I believe, to some of the immunizations, but the way it seems to me, it's out of the scope of the normal optometrist. And I did bring this to the attention of CSHP and Lori D. Martini. She's passing it on to the Government Affairs Group, and I'm not sure where this is going exactly. I just wanted to bring it to the attention of the board.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning. Dieter Steinmetz, Coast Compounding Pharmacy. With the new compounding regulations and the physical structure within the pharmacies, which seem to resemble much more how hospital pharmacy operates, I was hoping the board would be able to consider re-evaluating the pharmacy tech ratios for compounding and hopefully aligning them more with hospital ratios to allow compounding to be done in a way that actually functions properly.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to set some ground rules up in front. There's a lot of people here that want to testify. We do have a sign-in sheet at the back, so if you do want to testify, we're going to go in order on the sheet. We also have some individuals that submitted written comments, which will also be included. We ask that you limit your comments to 5 minutes so that we have enough time for everyone. We're going to we're going to take a lunch break around 12 o'clock, and then we'll go as long as it takes to make sure everyone gets heard. One of the things that we do ask is that you be concise and actually let us know what sections of the regulation that you would like to have the committee address. One of the areas, what we're going to be doing today is basically talking about concepts. We have another enforcement committee that is going to be in place before the next board meeting, and at that committee we're going to have staff work in between this committee and the next enforcement committee to draft language on any changes that the board committee members feel appropriate so that we can bring it to the next full board meeting for review. Any questions from the board members on that? No? Okay.
Can I just make a comment?
Yes.
There may have been a little bit of confusion. I think some of us signed in twice.
Oh,
So
okay.
when you just said that, we're all back here going, I don't want to say anything. So
Oh,
you might
okay.
run through the list real quick and we'll say yes or no. I think we just signed in
Well,
twice.
when I call your name, if you basically don't want to, it's fine. Just let me know, and I'll go on to the next person. Thank you for clarifying that. All right, move on to item 3, which is review and discussion of the board's compounding regulations, CCR Section 1735 and Section 1751, and relevant chapters of the U.S. Pharmacopoeia related to compounding. Business and Professions Code 4127.1 requires the board to adopt regulations to establish policies, procedures, and guidelines to implement Article 7.5 sterile drug products. It also requires the board to review any formal revisions to General Chapter 797 of the USP and National Formulary relating to the compounding of sterile preparations, not later than 90 days after the revision becomes official. There is a pending revision to US 797. I don't know yet, Ginny. Ginny and I were just at the NABP meeting, and we got the chance to talk to USP. Do we have any idea when those revisions will be available?
No,
Okay.
they're not sure when. I understand, I've heard rumors to the effect not before the end of the year, perhaps, and perhaps longer.
Okay, so when those get officially approved, we will then again review the regulations as a result of the USP 797. Attachment 1 has the board's current regulations, which establish the requirements for compounding drug preparations for California pharmacies and anyone shipping into California. Just as a bit of background, in April 2015, the board formally initiated a rulemaking to promulgate the board's compounding regulation. The final version of the regulation language was approved by the board, adopted by the board on January 19, 2016, and approved by the Office of Administrative Law on September 13, 2016. The effective date of the regulation was January 1, 2017. Since adoption by the board, both the committee and the board have received public comment regarding the impact of the regulations on patient populations, both human and animals, for certain sections. Although comments have been provided in many areas, the comments that we're going to focus on today, a lot of the comments have been focused on the board's requirements for assignment of a BUD, particularly for non-sterile compounds. During the committee's April meeting, a presentation was provided by Roadrunner Pharmacy regarding concerns about the board's regulation that related to the requirements for the establishment of BUD for veterinary products that were non-sterile. The committee was advised that some of the challenges for compounding meds for this patient population, and we were also advised about the cost impact of the board's current regulations and the resulting impact on consumers and their pets. We also understood from comments that there were also pharmacies that compounded products for human products that were non-sterile that were also impacted. After hearing the presentation and public comments about the board's regulation, the committee decided to schedule the meeting today to address and focus on several aspects of the board's compounding regulation. Also, during the May 2017 board meeting, the members also of the full board heard comments on the issue, including reference to the DQSA and the lack of applicability to veterinary compounding. The board staff has confirmed that the provision of DQSA relates specifically to human drug compounding, meaning that the compounding provisions for 503A and 503B apply only for compounding for human purposes. Staff notes, however, that California pharmacy law does not differentiate between compounding for humans versus animals. Staff has confirmed with USP,
UPS too, probably.
okay, USP, that all compounding chapters apply to human and animal patients, and that USP 795 includes a specific section for animal patients. So any questions from the board members on item 3? Any comments regarding item 3? If not, we'll move on to the full discussion of the regulations. Okay, item 4 is discussion and possible recommended changes to the board's compounding regulations. During this meeting, committee members will have the opportunity to discuss possible changes on specific areas to the board compounding regulations. The summaries of recommendations are being offered by staff and members of the regulated public. We did receive some written comments, and we'll hear some oral testimony today. We are focused, primarily the committee was established to talk about the BUD, as I stated previously, and we also have additional staff recommendations in terms of clarification of language. And those specifically relate to the following sections. The first one is section 1735, related to activities that do not constitute compounding. And that board staff does not believe that the mixing of ingredients from a compounding kit purchased from an FDA-approved manufacturer needs to be included in the definition of compounding if done according to the manufacturer's instructions. So I think the belief is that we should exempt those from the compounding definition. The second section is 1735.2I, relating to BUD requirements. And that is the board recommends changes to the establishment of the BUD to more closely align with the requirements of USP 795 for non-sterile products and USP 797 for sterile product, including changes to 1735.2 I1, I2, and I3. The third area of discussion is sterile compounding record-keeping requirements, which is 1751.1. The staff recommends clarifying the requirements for smoke studies, including both the applicable area where such studies must be performed, ISO Class 5, as well as the frequency in which they must be conducted, and the board staff's recommending semi-annually. The fourth area is section 1751.4, facility and equipment standards for sterile compounding. And the staff recommends clarifying that cleaning must be done whenever hazardous drugs are being compounded, as well as clarifying where the cleaning must occur. In addition to the staff recommendations, we received written comments that have been submitted by members of the public. And we will be going over each one of them that have submitted written comments and have them come up and speak and present their recommendations, and then we'll open it up to those that have actually signed up to be able to testify or provide comments today. So do we have, I think Senator Stone's not here yet?
I don't believe that Senator Stone is here. He was hoping to be able to. Oh, sorry, I did turn it off. We don't believe Senator Stone's in the room. He didn't express an interest in coming. However, his duties in the Capitol may prevent him from appearing today.
Okay.
So-
Do we have Erica Stongo?
Yeah, I think we're ready to go on him.
Okay, so we're going to have Erica Stongo also had asked to provide some comments, so we'll go in that order, and then we'll go on to the next, which is California Pharmacists Association.
So good morning, everybody. I appreciate the opportunity to participate and provide commentary. I want to applaud the California board and the commenters for trying to work real hard to harmonize, and nationally there's a big challenge in getting all of the state regs harmonized, and I think the template that everybody needs to focus on as the direction of the board is going, and many of the comments from the people that did submit their feedback to the board is spot on, is that, as much as possible, the California board within its purview allowable by law should harmonize with 797, 795 and all USP chapters, because those chapters have gone through extensive review, public comment, review, and then harmonizations. So as much as you can focus on that, and one of the areas I know that is in question is the BUDs for the non-sterile compounding, and 795 is very clear on that, and I think that as much as possible, the board should harmonize with those standards so as they get updated based on new information or best practices that the patient population, whether it be animal or human, be protected. And I think in light of the BD syringe problem that was experienced by the nation a couple years ago, we have to be very sensitive about the containers, the types of materials containers are being made by, and making sure that these products, assuming that we can make them sterile, that they're going to maintain their stability over their storage period. And I think the BUDs that have been established in 795, 797, 800, and 800 really doesn't establish any BUDs, but 795 and 797 really create a very safe harbor for people unless they have spent the time and the resources to do their own independent studies. And I think that that's in the best interest of the public. So outside of that, I applaud everybody's efforts and know this is kind of like making sausage. It's sometimes horrible and disgusting to watch, but it comes out tasty in the end. So again, it's all about the patient, and I think we have to keep that in mind. So that's all I have.
Comes out safe and tasty, right, Eric?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Safe
Okay.
and tasty, exactly. Even food. We know, there's been national recalls on food, and so and anything orally. So there are very specific bioburdens, especially because the FDA recently came out with guidance on non-sterile preparations in the presence of Bacillus cepacia, which can be a fairly life-threatening illness, infection in non-sterile formulations. So I appreciate the opportunity to provide commentary for this meeting.
Eric, when you reviewed some of the written comments that we received, are there any areas that you believe the committee should be focusing on?
I think harmonization with terminology is very important. I think that sterility and stability and potency over time, I think there are major differences between potency over time and stability. Having testified in the NECC trial, that was a big issue that got raised because we know that potency over time does not necessarily look at impurities and the inactive drug once it's been subject to degradation. So there are differences. I know there is a significant price difference in doing those studies, but again, we have to make sure that the patients are kept safe. So to the degree that harmonization with the USP standards and using that as the source of truth and the gold standard, I think that will be important moving forward. Certainly cleaning and disinfecting, there are major differences between that, and I think some of the other commentary that was made, most notably by the California Pharmacy Association, was pretty spot on that. So, those are my thoughts, Amy.
Perfect. Thanks, Eric. Any board
You're welcome.
member questions for Eric? Any public comments or questions for Eric? Thanks, Eric. I appreciate your time. Looking forward to
Not a
continuing
problem.
to work with you.
Likewise.
All right, we'll move on to the first. There's some seats up here for those that are in the back and don't have, I see some open spots. So please come up and you'll find an open seat up here.
And we're bringing more chairs.
Yeah, okay. California Pharmacists Association. And then right after that, where's my list here? After that, we'll have the International Academy of Compounding Pharmacists. Good morning, John.
Good morning.
And we'll be down 5 minutes. And Ann, you have your timer ready? All right.
Get ready, get set. set.
Oh, okay.
Is it on?
There's
We
a green
just-
light. If you push in the middle, there's a green light that'll come on. Oh.
Do we want
There we
to, Senator Stone, would you
Senator
like to
Stone
come
just
up?
walked in the room. He just got bumped, I think.
Yep.
John.
I know my place.
That ought to be good for a vote or two, though.
Good morning, Senator Stone.
Morning.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Perfect timing.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. It's an honor to have you down here in Southern California. I appreciate the special meeting for my compounder colleagues, and obviously we're going to hear a lot of concerns, and we're delighted that you're receptive to those concerns. Our goal as pharmacists is always making sure that our customers receive safe and effective medications to help them out. In compounding, we provide a lot of unique medications for humans and for animals, and we want to make sure that our patients continue to get access to those medications in the safest way possible, making sure that people are truly qualified to do these very important tasks. And so I want to commend you, the State Board of Pharmacy, because through your proactivity in this part of our profession, we, I think, have some of the best compounding pharmacies in the entire United States of America. And we all learn through the NEC unfortunate incident that we can't have people dabbling in this profession that don't know what they're doing. And so I'm here just to thank you and to applaud you and to be receptive to the concerns of many compounding pharmacies that want to just make sure that they're going to be able to continue to provide access for the very important medications that their patients, our patients, rely on, ensuring the safety, of course, in the delivery of those products. So those are my brief comments today. Mr. Weiser, it's great to see you, sir. It's a delight to see you. And to all of you, thank you for making the trip down here to Southern California, and I look forward to hearing all the testimony and seeing the actions of the board today.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
We
Nice to see
appreciate
you
your
all.
coming. All right, John.
Thank you, John.
My pleasure. So John Ross, CEO for the California Pharmacists Association. Thank you, committee members, Madam President, for hearing our testimony this morning. I will keep this brief and hopefully in a manner that is clear and concise for the committee. First of all, I want to thank the board, committee, and the staff for the recommendations that were included in the packet. We agree that the areas that you identified in the preview, Dr. Gutierrez, are those areas of large concern. And that we understand that at the next meeting there will be some actual language that we could review and possibly respond to. So thank you for that. There were a couple of other areas within our comments that I just wanted to highlight because I think that while the recommendations are very solid as a starting point, that we would like the committee to understand and at least consider what else might be necessary in reviewing the language to ensure sort of complete opportunities to clarify where necessary. If you refer to our letter that we submitted and the attachment there too, I wanted to identify a couple of those areas. First of all was under 1735(1)L, which is the definition of daily. We think it's very important as it relates to monitoring. We feel that this is probably a more technical fix necessary, but important for those pharmacies who have this capability. Monitoring of the freezer temperatures through electronic means is both a way to more precisely measure and comply with the regulation, as well as to allow for those pharmacies who aren't necessarily open every day to also comply with the measure. So we would ask the board's consideration of allowing additional definitional language for the definition of daily to include electronic monitoring of the freezer temperatures.
The other is 1735-1N, which is the definition of dosage unit. As we described in our letter and the attachment, many times in certain situations with prescribers, they will identify a compounded medication that is a course of therapy that requires individual dose vials over an extended period of time. Let's say 10 days for a certain antibiotic, or pick the medication. We don't feel like the current definitions of dosage unit would allow for that course of therapy to take place, because it is sufficient for one administration to one patient. So if you have a course of therapy over 10 days with individual vials, we think that the regulation would actually prohibit the prescriber from prescribing that medication in that manner. So we'd like the board to consider changing the definition of dosage unit to be clear that it's the quantity prescribed by the prescriber, still sufficient for one patient, but not necessarily one administration.
John, in reference to this, can we get some examples from CPHA of where that would be impactful, particularly in the non-sterile to sterile compounding? That would be really helpful.
Sure. And maybe hearing that, Dr. Gutierrez, members of the public would have those examples. I know we have a number of clinicians in the room here today.
Perfect. Thank you.
1735.1, we do believe there's probably a couple of definitions that the board should consider adding around the definition of sterility. As we looked at the different types of methods for sterility, we noticed that there was an absence in sterilized grade membrane processes, and so we'd like the board to consider adding those provisions to ensure that there's clarity that compounders could use that method for achieving sterility. Under 17, and I'm going to bypass 1735 2I1 through 3, the amendment of the beyond use dates. I will simply say that this is the single most problematic measure that we are certainly hearing from our members. I understand this isn't part of the staff recommendations to amend for consideration at the next meeting, so I won't belabor the point in the few minutes I have in front of the board. But just to say for emphasis that this is the most significant area of concern from our members. The other provision that I'd like to sort of jump down to is the provision under 1730, I apologize, I'm trying to get to 1751. Thank you. For the provision of requiring identical aspects of stability studies. Again, probably the second largest area of concern from our members, in that the provision and the definition and the interpretation of identical is very problematic when you're considering a history of time and a clinical body of evidence that is being gathered and collected upon which these clinical decisions for a current medication compound is being derived. The ability to go back and identically, in all those components, remanufacture in the compounding context, not manufacturing, but compounding those medications in an identical form is nearly unworkable. And I would just suggest that the entire premise of a body of knowledge or a body of evidence as it relates to evidence-based medicine is accumulating a series of studies, each with its unique characteristics and unique aspects, but over time has proven a similar outcome. And we think that's probably what the board is trying to achieve, that as those compounded medications are created using those studies, that you're looking for the same outcome. That doesn't necessarily mean that the components going in and the methods and procedures going into that compound have to be identical. So I thank the board for their consideration. I assume that was my cue, Ann. That time is up. And certainly, if opportunity presents, I'd like to come back up as the meeting progresses and some of our members are able to testify today on some of these components. So thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Any board member questions? Thank you. All right, we'll go on to International Academy of Compounding Pharmacists. Good morning.
Good morning. Eric Tosh, Vice President of the IACP Board. We rise in support of the comments from CPHA, and especially those focused on the language in the BUD section and terminology of identical, and getting some clarification there, because it does raise issues on how easy or difficult it is to replicate something that may have been done 30 years ago in a hospital, in Tristle's Handbook of Injectable Drugs, all the way to common non-sterile compounded preparations, and what appears to be the language in 1735 2I, and the application of it in the FAQs on the board website were identical ingredients. And the study done 30 years ago, that lot is long gone. So anyone using a lot today of a chemical, it's a USP monograph chemical. The assays are going to be in range. You're not using the identical chemical. So we just thrown out a body of work that's been around for, in some case, decades. Anthony, I'm not sure what else you want to add.
Hi, Anthony Grizid with IACP as well. Really no additional comments. I'm going to echo Eric's comments. If the expectation is that the study's being used to reference beyond use dating, if it's a requirement to have exact identical chemicals, identical compounding processes, I think it's going to limit the ability to use those studies that have been around for a long time, in some case decades, as a valuable reference for beyond use dating.
Can I ask a question, since, given your expertise, one of the things we've wrestled with is the recalls that we had last year, the year before, regarding the syringes, where the syringe material actually impacted the stability of the drug, and that wasn't really identified. So if I'd used a reference and I had based it on that, I would have been wrong, because the actual syringe content and the stopper that was used actually impacted the stability. How do you factor that in given that information?
That's a good question. I mean, you really have to understand the study and understand the packaging used in the study. If it simply says something like plastic syringes, you would have to kind of question, well, what type of plastic is being used? What type of stopper material is being used? You would really have to kind of dig into that study and understand the materials being used. I'm not sure if, I don't recall that specific example, but I'm not sure if that was in that study or not.
Okay.
Yeah, I do remember the BD putting out information about, I think it was hydromorphone or morphine, and some stability questions. So certainly we have to always look at the studies and drill down. And so sterile, you have to look at, I think, with one lens, non-sterile with a similar but different lens. For instance, you look at USP compounding monographs. I have a couple of examples if needed, but the identical process and step reference, it's a very general discussion. I think it was on Dancitron oral suspension mentioned grind up tablets or use on Dancitron hydrochloride USP. So now we've got two entirely different products, one that's got excipients and one that's the pure chemical. And the end result is you put it in a tight, light-resistant container, doesn't specify plastic, glass, amber, not amber. So there is some professional judgment that comes into play. Again, this is a non-sterile oral suspension. Certainly the lens of a sterile product, you have to look much more closely.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. We have, and for Kaiser Permanente, I'm going to have Alan lead that, given the fact that I work for Kaiser Permanente. So, Alan?
All right, who's up from Kaiser?
Good morning.
No, I say good morning.
Oh, that's right. I can still say hi.
Good morning, Alan, and the rest of the board. Corbin Bennett, Kaiser Permanente. I have 6 items to discuss today. The first one being harmonization or clarifying the language for the definition of a hazardous drug, 1735.1R. So USP 800 states that an entity must maintain a list of HDs which must include any items on the current NIOSH list that the entity handles. The definition by the BOP 1735.1R states hazardous means all antineoplastic agents identified by NIOSH, which implies Table 1 only, as meeting the criteria for a hazardous drug and any other drugs, compounds, or materials identified by hazardous by the pharmacist in charge. If USP 800 states that you must adopt the NIOSH list, then that infers that the PIC must adopt the entire list. 1735.6E state requires a negative pressure room for all hazardous drug compounding. Compounding of all NIOSH drugs, including Table 2 and 3 drugs, requires a negative pressure room if an organization adopts the NIOSH list. So the recommendation here is to have harmonization with the USP 800 definition of HDs by 7/118 to ensure that the date of implementation of USP 800, we also have that in the California regulations. Item number 2 was previously discussed around video of smoke studies in all ISO certified spaces. So the request is to clarify the required location for smoke studies. Does this also include ISO 7 and 8 certified spaces, or is it simply ISO 5? Also requesting clarifying the frequency of smoke studies. Is that going to be every 6 months or only during initial certification? Item number 3, CCR 1751.4D is around cleaning. Cleaning shall be done using a germicidal detergent and sterile water. The recommendation is to provide a clearer definition of germicidal and request to add after the following. So the current language states cleaning shall be done using a germicidal detergent and sterile water. The request is to add the use of a ready-to-use germicidal detergent, including sterile water, is acceptable. The reason for this request is we had originally interpreted this to mean that you must use a germicidal and then follow with sterile water. So we want clarification to avoid any confusion. Item number 4, 1751.4G1. This is the only mention of requiring 2 pairs of sterile ASTM D6978-05 standard gloves, which are essentially chemotherapy certified gloves. So we're recommending adding a requirement for 2 pairs of standard gloves for all HD compounding, which is in concordance with USP 800. Item number 5, CCR 1751.3 states requires a sampling plan specific to viable air, surface, and non-viable particle sampling. Additionally, CCR 1751.4 requires viable surface and air sampling shall be done at least every 6 months for all sterile to sterile compounding. So request to clarify need for a sampling plan for the segregated compounding area outside of the ISO 5 environment. So is the sampling plan and procedures for the non-viable particle sampling as well as the viable air and surface limited to the ISO certified areas only, or are we also requesting sampling done in the segregated compounding area? Last item, number 6. This is a big challenge for our organization right now. So 1735.6F states, where compliance with the January 1, 2017 amendments to Article 4.5 or Article 7 requires physical construction or alteration to a facility or physical environment, the board or its designees may grant a waiver of such compliance for a period of time to permit such physical changes. CCR 4123, compounding drug for other pharmacy for parenteral therapy. Notice to board, any pharmacy that contracts to compound a drug for parental therapy pursuant to a prescription for delivery to another pharmacy shall report that contractual arrangement to the board. That information shall be reported by the pharmacy performing the compounding services within 30 days of commencing that compounding. So 4123 allows for compounding of parenteral sterile products from one licensed pharmacy to another. However, it does not, it's silent on non-sterile. So in our organization, if we will have a sterile compounding pharmacy on the outpatient side, the ambulatory space, and the inpatient space, in some cases we've had a waiver denied. So we are moving all of our hazardous drug compounding to the compliant pharmacy. We are doing that using 4123, so essentially contracting between those 2 pharmacies. So that is possible with the sterile hazardous drug compounding, which is okay. Our concern is now with the non-sterile hazardous drug compounding, because we do not have a place to compound the non-HD if we follow 4123. Thank you.
Enlightening, thank you. Board questions?
Okay, we'll move on to Letco Medical.
This guy looks familiar.
We'll keep this short. Eric Tosh, Vice President of Professional Services at Letco Medical. As our comments mirror those of CPHA and IACP, we rise in support of those comments and just want to stress we look forward to the comments that the board committee has already suggested they're going to discuss on the section on BUD, and we just ask you to look very carefully at the language and the implications of that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rite Aid. And then right after Rite Aid, we'll have Rick Rhodes.
Madam President, if you don't mind, we figured we would all come up in unison since it was the same topic we'd like to address. Introductions, Mark Johnston, Senior Director of Regulatory Affairs for CVS Health. I'm also elected to NABP's Executive Committee, a position I was elected to when I was Executive Director of the Idaho Board of Pharmacy.
I'm Laura Churns with Albertsons Companies. I do legislative and regulatory affairs.
Hey, good morning. My name is Rob Mullins. I'm the Divisional Pharmacy Vice President for the Western U.S. for Rite Aid.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And we also expected to have Lori Walmsley here from Walgreens, and she may be running in any minute. She's had some travel delays.
Okay.
16 CCR 1735.8C requires that pharmacies engaged in compounding practices have a quality assurance plan in place that, among other things, includes a schedule for routine testing and analysis of specified compounded drug preparations to ensure integrity, potency, quality, and labeled strength on at least an annual basis. In the retail pharmacy setting, the volumes of compounding is low, and compounding practices are generally limited to simple and/or moderate non-sterile compounding. If pharmacies cannot afford to provide these services, it will limit patient access to these important medications. With a majority of retail pharmacy compounding done with commercially available FDA-approved ingredients, we believe a change to 1735.8C would pose little to no risk to public safety. And at CVS Health, we took a look at the compounded drug products that we're making in a retail environment, and there was one trend that certainly fell out, and that was simple compounding to Medi-Cal patients, and these patients are particularly susceptible to access issues.
Can you give us some examples, like what you're referring to when you say simple? This is non-sterile, right?
Definitely non-sterile
Creams,
compounding.
oral?
Yeah, 100% non-sterile. Not just oral. The majority of what we saw were two creams mixed together. And initially, you would think that would be, for a child's diaper rash, but what it appeared to be was more for a senior's diaper rash, a senior on Medi-Cal. We also saw a lot of Magic mouthwash, and I would say that the overwhelming majority were two creams mixed together in Magic mouthwash.
Okay, thank you.
So, good morning. Again, Laura Churns, Albertsons Companies. So, I would like to talk a little bit more about the patient impact of these rules, which is truly what matters most. So, I'm a pharmacist, and as a pharmacist, I can honestly say that the unintended consequences of these rules are worrisome. Although simple and moderate compounding is not a predominant part of our business in the traditional community pharmacy setting, it is a very important one from a patient care standpoint. I remember just a couple years ago watching one of my favorite patients go through chemotherapy and radiation treatment, which left her with severe mouth sores. At some point, these sores were so severe that she was unable to eat or sometimes even swallow. The Magic mouthwash that I prepared for her had an immediate effect and really improved her quality of life. Magic mouthwash is one of those really simple compounds. You mix 3 liquids together that patients, they end up taking a dose of it right there at the out window, and you can see on their face the effectiveness. So the quality of life improves, and immediately it has that effect on them. And it's concerning to me to think that these cancer patients may not be able to get Simple Magic mouthwash at their regular community pharmacy, resulting in delay in care because they'll have to find a compounding pharmacy that's maybe miles away, or they may be forced to use mail order pharmacy, which could take days. And it could also result in possible compromised patient safety. So the compounding pharmacy that they choose to use will not have access to the patient's historical pharmacy prescription data. So therefore, when they try to run a DUR check, it's not going to be inclusive of all of the medications that they're taking. Therefore, again, possibly compromising patient safety. And just one more example, the 2009 flu pandemic. So at this time, pharmacies were unable to obtain the Tamiflu suspension because it was on back order. So community pharmacies were compounding it on an as-needed basis with commercially available ingredients. We were mixing commercially available Tamiflu capsules with cherry syrup. Again, the thought of delayed and fragmented care for a vulnerable patient population, I say that because flu is especially devastating in patients 5 years and younger, as they can lead to serious complications for this age group. And for a drug that is time sensitive, you need to take Tamiflu within 48 hours of symptoms. This is worrisome to me. So, thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Well, good morning and thank you. Thank you for consideration of our concerns. Like I said, my name is Rob Mullins. I'm a Rite Aid pharmacist, but also the Divisional Vice President for the pharmacies here in the Western U.S., including the 582 pharmacies that we have in California. My time serving the health and wellness of my patients was spent in small towns in rural America. I was a pharmacist in Oklahoma, in the small oil field communities, and a pharmacist in Ohio in the small Appalachian rural towns. These towns are very similar to the ones that I've seen in my new role out here on the West Coast, especially in California, in towns like Blythe and Needles and Mount Shasta, very small areas. And I think the picture I want to paint is, as a pharmacist in those communities, I'd had patients that their access to health care, they traveled many, many miles. Sometimes it was a full day to get to their prescriber or their specialist in Columbus or Tulsa, or in this case, perhaps Sacramento or LA or San Diego. And those patients would come to me as a pharmacist at the end of a long day of travel, and all they wanted to do was get home to their family and loved ones. And sometimes they would have a prescription for a compounded medication that was simple, didn't take much energy to produce, and I was able to get them home right away, fill the prescription as prescribed, and get them back home right away. And this is something I would like to provide for all 582 communities that we serve here in California. Our SVP of Regulatory Affairs, Dan Miller, submitted a letter on Rite Aid's behalf. And Dan could not be here with us today. He sends his apologies, and he sends me as his replacement, so I hope you accept both. We appreciate the board addressing public concerns with compounding, especially for complex and sterile compounds. We would ask the board to reconsider requiring assays for pharmacies, only helping patients in need with these simple and moderate compounds. The compounds are completed very infrequently and seldom with the same concentration, but are completed by highly trained and board-approved pharmacists. Requiring assays for simple and moderate compounds may lead to pharmacies, as illustrated in others' letters as well, to cease providing the service to residents in California, those that are in need. Many of us here today have taken care of pharmaceutical and healthcare needs in these communities for many years and are often accessible from early in the morning until late at night, and sometimes 24/7. So I hope the board reconsiders this requirement of annual assays for simple and moderate compounding, and I thank you for your time.
And just to ask a question, we are only referring to oral and creams and topical is what you're referring to. This does not include any sterile.
Absolutely non-sterile.
Yeah, we
100% correct.
We don't do any sterile.
Could you provide us with a partial listing of the compounds? Just going over, seeing what is actually there and what we're dealing with will make it much clearer.
Yeah.
It's a good idea.
Absolutely, we'll submit that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
So I'm happy to hear, but I'm curious, in the past, can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So have you done this simple compounding in the past? Is this something that CVS and Thrifty and the chains commonly do? It's been my experience that they have, this has got nothing to do with really what your question is, but it's been my experience that the large chains have gotten away from compounding simple, or am I under a misimpression about that?
Speaking for CVS Health, we absolutely have a program where every pharmacy does simple compounding.
Thank you.
Yeah, Rite Aid is the same. We do simple compounding, and it's not very frequent, but we do it. And it's often for our most critically ill patients. It could be the pediatric patient that needs something special that's not available orally. Like I can remember breaking open omeprazole capsules and suspending them for a small baby in Greenfield, Ohio. So there's a lot of that stuff that we are able to do. We don't do it as often, you're right, but it is something that is very critical, especially these patients in these very rural communities.
I agree with you with the need. It was just the access, and I didn't realize that the chains did it because the community pharmacies, the independents usually did a lot of it, and it seemed like they were the only ones doing it, so it's good to hear that everybody does it.
And I'm guessing too, typically you would have a compounding log that would reference some evidence that shows stability of that medication and the potency requirements.
Yes, CVS system has an intranet, and you have access to all of the recipes, if you will. Absolutely, there's a log that's kept of every single compound that's made, separate from just the typical electronic records for filling a prescription.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
guys.
so
Have a great day.
In conclusion, I just wanted to wrap up by saying, ideally, we would hope that simple and moderate non-sterile compounding would be exempt from these requirements, but pursuant to NECDS and CRA's letter, their suggestion is if you have issues with certain preparations, that the law only refer to those, i.e. it wouldn't refer to simple mixing of creams or magic mouthwash, but you may find a certain formulation that you want to have subject to this law.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Rick Rhodes. Good morning, Dr. Rhodes.
Good morning. Rick Rhodes, the Director of Compounding at University Compounding Pharmacy. I want to thank you for holding this meeting today. I think the board has shown diligence and openness in writing their compounding regulations. I've had the pleasure of taking many exams for other states, and I can tell you that California has shown that they want to go above and beyond, which is a good thing. I think compounders want to do the right thing. The issue I think two issues that I felt compelled to write into the board for, and we do non-sterile and sterile, specifically high-risk compounding. One of the things that I hear, and I know this, that we want, first of all, there to be no gaps in the regulation to make sure the patient's safety is not compromised, which I feel that there are a couple that I'll address. The other is that we want clarity. We want consistency. It's easy if we know what to do. And a lot of what I do in my job is trying to figure out what is required, not just with USP, but also State Board of, California State Board of Pharmacy and other states. And sometimes, believe it or not, it is not clear. And you end up having to jump through these hoops, and I don't think that's what the state really wants. We want to have tight regulations that protect patient safety, but they're also clear, and we know what to do. Let me start with the gaps that I feel. We do focus on high-risk compounding, which is when you start with non-sterile ingredients and you have to sterilize that process, sterilize the drug. And that it's called high risk for a reason, because you start out with something that's not sterile. One of the gaps that I've seen in the regulation is that there's really no requirement for the methods of sterilization. How do you sterilize that product? I noticed that it does say process validation for chosen sterilization methods, and although that may be more than what other states have, we don't officially adopt USP, which is my first recommendation. If we could just wholesale adopt USP, a lot of these problems would go away. But I understand that may not be possible. If that isn't possible, then I think it's really important the State Board of Pharmacy clarifies for high-risk compounding, what are some of the standards for sterilization when it comes to steam sterilization, dry heat sterilization, or even the filters that are used? What is the standard for what has to be done to sterilize that product? And then what verification is necessary to prove that that cycle of verification, or that run of verification was effective? Those are really important. And I included, I wish I could say this is my language, is not as directly from USP. And the USP 797 and the proposed USP 797 has a whole section on how to go through this process. And I think that if California does not adopt USP, this should be something to consider, maybe not the entire language, but something in there. I looked at other states, Texas, Florida, other states do have some reference to the sterilization requirements. The other issue besides the gaps would be the consistencies. And one of the, we talked about definition. I think definitions are important in harmonizing that. There needs to be, where I see an issue with consistency is in USP 800 and our HD. I understand that the current regulation says that anti-neoplastics must be defined as an HD, must be included as an HD. But we get into this issue where we have federally, you have to include all on the NIOSH list. And so if you, basically 800 allows for, it basically says everything on the NIOSH list has to be an HD. However, there is a workaround where you can do an assessment of risk to have alternative containment and work practices. So not everything, if you have an HD pill, it doesn't have to be treated the same way as an HD drug that's Table 1 NIOSH list. Currently, there's no provision in the law to do that. And then you have to play this game where you have to say, well, it's not an HD, I'm going to call it a NIOSH drug. Because if I call it an HD drug and I include it on my list, then the Board of Pharmacy is going to require me to do this. And I've heard of, I haven't personally experienced this, but I've heard of issues where pharmacies do the assessment of risk, but include drugs like estradiol and estriol on their official list of HD, and the inspector says, well, you need to go through and do the entire requirements of HD because you put it on the list, even though you did an assessment of risk. And I know this is getting very technical, but you have to play these word games where you have to say, no, it's not an HD, in my professional judgment, it's not, but I'm going to include it on the NIOSH list. Those things I think need to be cleared up. I know my time has expired here. I see if I have anything else. The other issue is beyond use states. I know everyone's very much interested in that. So are we. I think that if we don't adopt USP, I would recommend to clarify what is meant by stability studies. In my personal opinion, adding method suitability test as a requirement for stability, it doesn't fit. There are certain things that don't method suitability is referring to something else, and we need to clarify what is meant and what is required depending on what drug it is. For example, if it's a non-sterile or a sterile, if it's a multi-dose vial or if it has preservative, then preservative effectiveness testing should be done. If it's a sterile, then really container closure is required for sterile but not non-sterile. So some of these things need to be worked out if you're going to continue with the same language that you have or the same requirement for stability studies. So really just filling the gaps, number one, and providing consistency so we as compounders can do the right thing, because we really do. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Roadrunner Pharmacy, and after that we'll have Wedgewood Village Pharmacy. Good morning.
Hey, good morning. Good morning. Attach some,
Yeah, please. Thank you. Good to see you guys again.
Thank you. I'm not sure, I guess the green button is on, I just can't see it. Hi. And I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Lee Martin. I'm PIC at Roadrunner Pharmacy. I'm here on behalf of the pharmacy, and Bruce Dell, the general manager, who was here before you at the last committee meeting. And Basically, we submitted a written statement of our concerns, and at least 32 states have essentially adopted USP as their guidance in proper compounding procedures. With its GMP-like standards for non-sterile compounds, 1735 far exceeds USP in a number of areas. And as we've already heard, one of the biggest issues is clarification on stability testing. And without the clarification, worrying about California asking for forced degradation on testing compounds, which CIAL had actually stated could cost up to $20,000 for a single test. I was happy to see that the California Pharmacy Association had actually made the recommendation to go with potency over time, which has been the standard and which they are recommending continues to be the standard as far as the testing goes. And since all this is written, I'm going to try to be brief to stay within my time. We were also concerned about the documentation of the 1735-2 says the prescriber has approved use of a compounded drug either orally in writing, where approval is given orally, that approval should be noted. Documentation of the use for a compound is equally problematic, especially in veterinary medication, where there are many off-label conditions that can be associated with use of the compound. Even the AVMA recommends that this action might be left best to the individual medical record. Lot number and rationale for the use of the compound can be noted. And as well as in 1735-2, using a purchase order or other documentation prior to furnishing that list, the number of patients seen or to be seen in the prescriber's office. It is just impossible for the veterinarians to anticipate what their use is going to be, how much use there is going to be, because they have no idea as far as office stock what animals are going to be treating that day. The weights of the different animals, the species of the different animals, really, there's a difference in how much of the product they're going to be using. And USP makes no reference towards mandating forecasts for office stock items. And lastly, as I'm sure you all know, with the signing of the Congressional Omnibus Bill into law, basically the language calls on the FDA to release new guidance to allow 503 pharmacists to compound for office use, and also tells the FDA that 503A pharmacies should be basically inspected under USP guidelines 795, 797, and according to state board regulations, that they should not be held to CGMP standards. That is left for the 503B pharmacies. So with all that said, I am very encouraged with the direction the board is going with recommending the establishment of BUD to closely align with 795 and 797, and be looking forward to the language that you will be writing between now and the next committee meeting as far as those standards go.
So to clarify, and my understanding from your previous testimony at the previous meeting was that as long as your request is for us to comply with 795 for the non-sterile compounds.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Align closely to 795 and USP 795, 797 standards, and I think that's the direction it looks like Congress is telling the FDA to go also with this most recent mandate.
And your request does not deal with sterile compounds?
No.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to add one thing or clarify one thing. I noticed that in one of the handouts, it appears that there's a complaint attached to this. So I'm going to ask the board members not to look at that and let's collect it, because should that complaint become anything, then you would be prohibited from acting on it. So I don't know whether or not you maybe have the ability to sort of delete that one piece off, and we'll circulate the remainder of your attachment.
Yes,
Because
I was
the
just-
board members would
Yeah, I
be-
was just here strictly to respond, to refer to this, and then that to what we had already submitted, and then that handout relates to.
I think our council was referring to a handout that was just distributed to us.
Yeah.
Am I allowed I'm sorry, I thought it came from you. Was that, that was not from you? That was.
It was from Roadrunner.
It's from
so.
Roadrunner, it would be from me. It's more of just an assessment of what we're seeing out in the
Okay.
field, different perspective.
So just simply, if you have specific complaint information, if you think somebody's violating the law, I will stop you from
Okay.
sharing that with the board members, because what happens is if such complaints turn into actual
Okay.
actions, then the board members need to not have seen the evidence so that they can actually
That's
weigh
fine.
it at the appropriate time.
Well, that being said, you guys have that. I'd also like to read part of my statement, and I can ignore that portion if you'd like. But my name's Adam Landsman. I'm the regional sales manager from Roadrunner Pharmacy for over 10 years. I personally call on more than 900 California veterinary practices several times a year. And, in spite of the recent California board enactment of Regulation 1735, I have found most of my pharmacy competitors ignoring the implemented standards. While my purpose here is to not reveal their names publicly, I do want the board just to be aware of what's going on. You guys can look through those attachments when you get a moment, but I do have a question for the board. My question to the board is two-pronged. Have any pharmacies been given an exemption to the new BUD restrictions?
We have no authority to do that.
So-
You'll see in some of the complaints that is what we hear pharmacies
I think the agenda item that we have is any comments to the regulations, and that's what we're going to stick to the agenda.
Correct.
So if there's any comments that you have in relation to any of the regulations that we've discussed, we are open to listening to that.
Are the regulations going to be enforced?
They are being enforced.
There's just clearly an unlevel playing field, and that was what we mentioned also in our previous presentation, that Roadrunner's sinking large sums of money into complying with the new regulations here in California, and basically we're just not seeing anyone else doing that. That's why I'm asking about regulation.
We have a room full of people that will tell you to the contrary.
Sure. I'm just speaking from what I'm seeing out in the field.
This is off subject. I think we need to resume
We need to
that
stay on
topic.
the agenda, which is the regulations. So
So-
do you have any further comments regarding the regulations that we're here to discuss?
I just want to make sure no pharmacies have been granted a waiver or a.
Okay, it's not on the agenda right now to do that. So if
Okay.
you have any questions, I'm sure that the executive officer can meet with you one-on. If you have any questions, you can forward them to her, but at this point, we're staying on the agenda.
Okay.
Any more
Thank you.
comments from Roadrunner regarding the regulations?
No, you have my written.
Yes, we have that.
You have
Yes.
that in the packet.
Thank you.
And I do appreciate you for the opportunity to appear before the committee.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, Wedgewood Village Pharmacy. And then after that, we'll have Golden Gate VCP. Yes. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Anthony Grzyb, Director of Pharmacy Compliance at Wedgewood Pharmacy.
Good morning, I'm Rachel Ponticus. I'm National Counsel for Wedgewood Pharmacy.
Good morning.
Oh, there we go. We appreciate the opportunity to come in and provide some oral comments along with the written comments that we submitted. And we support the, specifically around 1735.2I, the comments that CPHA has submitted. And I know you guys are, the board is working on making some alterations to that section. Specifically, to address a couple of examples, for sterile items in particular, for a non-sterile to sterile compound, it is often necessary to extend the beyond use date beyond those in USP in order to allow time for the sterility testing. So if, for example, I believe USP requires a 14-day beyond use date assigned to an aqueous compound. However, it takes 14-plus days to get that sterility test done before we can dispense the item. So you've used up your entire beyond use date performing the sterility testing. So there's other methods for sterility testing, but oftentimes it is required for us to extend the beyond use dating. So in particular, in 1735.2I, we are supporting the comments previously submitted regarding allowing the potency over time to be used for extending those dates for stability. As Eric mentioned earlier, there is an extensive cost associated with doing a force degradation study. Wedgwood dispenses roughly 200 unique sterile items to California patients. The cost to go back and do a force degradation study for those items would be at a minimum $1.4 million for the company. So that's
Are
not.
you located in California?
No, we're located in New Jersey.
In New Jersey?
Yep.
And what type of products are you?
Mostly veterinary items, sterile and non-sterile compounds. And, you know, it's for, we don't know exactly how we're going to manage that, but I can be pretty certain that the company's not going to invest that amount of money to do stability testing for the requirements of a single state. So we just ask that you kind of keep that in consideration as well. There is an economic factor as well. And at the end of the day, if that's the requirement, we're going to have to greatly reduce the number of sterile items that we can offer to California patients just because of that cost.
So you're a veterinary pharmacy.
Mhm.
And in terms of the products, what we heard from Roadrunner was theirs was just non-sterile. Are you of the same opinion, or are you asking for exemption for sterile as well, or modifications to the sterile?
Well, my interpretation of 1735.2I is that there's two sections. There's a section for sterile and a section for non-sterile. We're asking for a modification for both. And the CPHA's recommendations, I believe, incorporate what we're requesting for both. So,
For the sterile as well?
yes. And then we're talking about the stability piece of the sterile items. The sterility testing piece, you know, we encourage the board to mirror what 797 requires for sterility testing and method suitability testing. In addition to 1735.2, we wanted to just also bring to your attention 1735.2C. We appreciate the board's acknowledgement that office use compounding is a necessary part of veterinary health. Where the confusion lies within 1735.2C is specifically there's a couple of requirements that require the pharmacy and the practitioner to determine the quantity that they're going to be using per patient. However, that's difficult to do in veterinary health if you haven't seen the patient yet. So a lot of this office use compounds are being dispensed for administration in an office in you know, a critical situation. They haven't seen the patient yet. So when you've got, you know, patients as small as a ferret or a cat all the way up to a horse, it's difficult to understand from a per patient perspective what quantity of that medication you might be using and to anticipate that. So we submitted some edits or some suggested edits around how to just kind of clarify that and make it a little bit more, you know, the expectation is that it's up to the veterinarian to decide the quantity that they think they're going to need based on their you know, what they expect to see, the number of patients and the type of patients that they're going to see. Right now, it seems to be that there's a requirement that the pharmacy validate the veterinarian's justification for the quantity, and that's kind of a difficult thing to do, and we're not exactly sure, you know, how that should be documented or how the pharmacy should prove that. So we just ask that we can make some adjustments to that section as well.
And you're shipping to other states besides California
Yeah.
for prescriber office use?
In states that permit it, yes.
So how many states most of them permitted or not permitted?
Yeah, you can answer that.
I'm just curious, since you're here and you're doing multiple states, it would be good to get your
Yeah,
input.
so good morning. I'm happy to answer that question. Again, I'm National Counsel for Wedgwood. I represent many other compounding pharmacies, and they do dispense nationwide. So I don't have an exact figure, but generally, there are only about 15 states that are patient-specific, and the rest of them allow office use. Now, that would be in veterinary health, because of course, in human health, as you all have understood, there is the overlay, the federal overlay of Section 503A, which is of the FDCA, which controls only human health. So I know we had some comments from Roadrunner about congressional language and recent bills, et cetera. Of course, that all applies to the human health context, which is why I really wanted to commend the board for this undertaking, because it is critically important that the state boards are aware that even in the human health context, what 503A does is give certain guidelines to FDA. It certainly did not preempt all of human health compounding. Compounding is still primarily regulated by the states and boards just like this one. So what, I know you all know this, but maybe this is your pep talk. I know we're last on the list. What you all do is critically important legally, because FDA has very limited control over even human health compounds, and veterinary compounds are controlled exclusively by the states. So Wedgwood, we wanted to make sure to have Anthony come and explain his point of view, to bring me to give some overlay as well. And so we thank you for recognizing office use. So to answer your question, it's about 15 states that are patient-specific. And in those states, there has been involvement with the AVMA, the American Veterinary Medical Association. Some of them have gone back and had to make exceptions. Minnesota is an example that's coming to mind, because they were unable, in the patient-specific manner, to appropriately get the pets medicated.
And in those 35 states that do not have 503 requirements, are there any limits to the amount that can be stored per, so similar to our regulations?
So I just want to clarify one thing you said, not to get too nitpicky, but I am the lawyer here, so I'll.
Yeah, no, definitely.
The 503A is a federal requirement, so
Right.
that applies everywhere.
Right.
So the question would be outside of 503A.
Those that allow prescriber office use.
Yeah, those
How's
that allow. Some of them have quantity limitations, but they're not working out very well for the reasons that Anthony explained. Because again, a lot of this is the prescriber doesn't have ESP to figure out exactly what they're going to need in the office or what animal is going to present with the disease state. So to figure out, and these animals are different sizes, right? And they vary widely. So that has been an issue. The quantity limitations have been an issue. And in other states, I know also the veterinary medical organizations have gotten involved as well for the vets to kind of explain this.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We're going to put pep talk on the next agenda.
Oh, yeah. Did you guys like that?
Definitely. That was very informative. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll Golden Gate VCP, and then we'll take a break. Is Golden Gate VCP here?
Sorry, I didn't even realize we were on the agenda.
You don't need to speak. I mean, it's.
Well, I'll just come up and say that I wrote that before I read CPHA's comments. I feel like our comments are pretty in line with CPHA's comments. Theirs are much more technical and legal in nature, so we support what they've put on there, and if you have any questions about what we submitted, that'd be fine.
Thank you.
Yes.
All right, Eric. Well, we have a 10-minute break. We will start back up at 10 o'clock.
Great, great.
CDS, CRA is up next. After NACDS, we're going to hear from I Care for Animals. Where's my gavel? We're going to get started again. If everyone could have a seat, please. We want to make sure we have enough time to give everyone an opportunity. NACDS CRA is next. After that, we have eye care for animals. Pardon me? Oh, you don't need to talk? Are you from NACDS?
No, ECFA.
ECF?
I care for animals.
Okay, you don't need to talk? Perfect, okay.
Amy, there's nobody here from any.
No one else from NACDS, okay. Next is veterinary vision. Is veterinary vision here? Okay, if not, CHA, California Hospital Association. No, okay. We'll move on to Steve Pomerantz, Town Center Pharmacy.
Right here.
You want to come up, please?
Sure.
You are next.
Thank you for hearing me. I am an independent compounding pharmacy, and we have some issues regarding the regs for each of the rooms that we are trying to comply with the current laws. And I'm interested to know what is required for each of these rooms based on sterile and non-sterile compounding, non-hazardous. So those are the issues that we're trying to obtain with the board, so we could comply with all these regulations. And where can we get those regs, and what is necessary for us to fully comply with these regs?
So you're asking for where are the regulations
Yes.
regarding, maybe we can have board staff provide that?
Yeah, Christine, yes, I've
Yes.
conferred with her, so she's been a big help.
Okay.
That's it.
Great.
Thank you.
The self-assessment for compounding also has application of the specific requirements. So if you go online and get the self-assessment for compounding, that is also a guide that can help apply some of what we're going to look for when we do an inspection.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Rick Tapia, Vagron Incorporated? No need? Okay. Aaron Michael, PCCA, I'm sorry, Renell Larson, PCCA?
You can scratch both of us. That was the confusion.
Okay, great. And Aaron Michael, okay. Lynette Lugo, too?
Yep.
All right. Kenneth Schell, Sharpell. Good morning, Dr. Schell.
Good morning, Doctor. Happy Friday.
Former board president.
Yes, former board president.
I'll make my remarks brief. And again, I want to applaud and thank the board for setting this meeting up. I've never been more proud to be a pharmacist than today, to see 200 pharmacists in a room, all with a common purpose. So again, I appreciate you bringing us all together. Basically, I want to make a comment with regard to USP 797-800. I do applaud the board stance for not adopting it in toto, but to take the relevant parts that make sense for pharmacists in California. I would urge you to continue to do that. Second, I would like to just make a brief comment about 1735.1 with regard to ranges. When you have temperature ranges, all too often it's enforced specifically by those ranges when they're actually upper and lower limits. I'd like the board to consider somehow making it possible to have the inspectors, when they come out, to understand that there are ranges, that the specific ranges that are cited in the regulation do not mean that outside those ranges mean products cannot be used. That's basically my comment. The other comments I have are not specific to 1735 or 51. It's with repackaging, hospital pharmacies being able to provide product to outpatients. We had an emergent situation where our outpatient compounding pharmacy closed down. We had to make extreme measures to go and continue to provide service to our patients because a repackaging pharmacy cannot provide product to outpatient pharmacies. I'd like that to be considered for discussion to possibly allow that to happen in certain situations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Jerry Green, San Diego Compounding Pharmacy. Good morning.
Good morning, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, fighting a head cold, but I'll make it.
Now, you and I both.
Okay, so
Stay away from us.
this is just a little addition and a piggyback to some of the things that were said this morning. I'd like to preface what I'm about to say to to commend the pharmacists behind me and all of my colleagues that showed up and showed a concern. We've always been viewed as a fragmented association and a profession, and whether it be good or bad, we have a common goal, and we're all here and we're all together. The reason we're here and the reason that the people are in this room, and these California pharmacists, myself included behind me, do follow California regulations. Okay, and we all do the best that we can. None of us are cutting corners. So that being said, what was mentioned earlier. Secondly, as a consumer and a pharmacist, and I'm not looking for an answer, but under the auspices of the state board, we do the best that we can. And the question that arises and the answers that are hard to give to physicians and patients and to try to comprehend myself is how 795, how December 31st, 11:59 p.m., my creams, gels, and ointments were good for 6 months or within professional judgment of the lowest expiration date of the active ingredients or inert ingredients. 12:01 a.m., they were good for 30 days. And, you know, I'm being asked to do stability studies to showing that things are longer. I would like to know who I can ask to show me that they went bad in 60 seconds. And that's really the only comment I have is besides that, is for you folks to look at the restraints we're being asked to work under and how the accessibility of pharmacy to the patient is slowly being crushed, and for patients to be able to come in and get things, whether it be an oral medication, a sterile medication. I don't believe that one bad apple spoils the entire bunch in this country. And again, the reason the people in this room are here is because we do the best that we can and always have.
Thank you. William Stewart, Hartley Medical.
No comment at this time. I just wanted to hear my name called out.
All right. You got it. Mike Cook, Central Admixture Pharmacy Services, CAPS. Did I pronounce your name appropriately?
You did, and I'm amazed. Thank you so much. Mike Cook, Vice President, Professional Services with CAPS. We run both 503A and 503B pharmacies in the state of California and beyond the state of California. I just want to echo and perhaps expand on something that Eric Castango said towards the end of his comments, because it might have got lost and it was very important. And that is, potency tests over time do not demonstrate stability. And if the board's desire is to harmonize as much as possible with USP 797, then they need to consider the FAQ up on the USP website that goes over this issue and basically also has references a position paper that demonstrates the difference and how a potency test over time is not considered a stability test.
That's on USP's website?
It is, and I have copies here. They also, they reference their position paper, and then they also reference a article from the International Journal of Pharmaceutical Compounding.
Perfect.
So I think it is important. It's probably not a popular view in this room, but it's just not correct. Second, President Gutierrez mentioned something about the BD thing and stability studies. Stability studies didn't really help in that situation. It was potency studies upon release, because we got caught up on that. We were one of the first to notify them because we were doing release testing, potency tests before release, and we couldn't get them to come out, even though we had stability tests. And what happened was they changed one of the ingredients in the stopper, and that's what caused the problem. So I used to think potency tests, you don't need that. You have a stability study. Why do you need a potency test? It's all the same stuff. Well, it can change. So I've changed my opinion on that, and that's why I don't discount the fact that potency testing over time doesn't demonstrate stability.
And your comments are related to sterile products?
Sterile products.
Great. Thank you.
I do.
Yeah, I'd like to see that. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. John Gray, Keck Medical Center at USC. I think we already heard from him.
Yeah.
Okay. David Joseph, Absolute Pharmacy? I'm sorry if I mispronounced it.
Absolute.
Absolute, okay. Good morning.
Good morning. I represent a pharmacy that has a non-resident permit where ship sterile and non-sterile drugs into California.
Where are you located?
Tampa, Florida. I just want to speak in harmony with what Eric Costango, California Pharmacists Association, and ISCP has said. One of the comments I want to make about the bad player situation, I understand, and a lot of people don't understand that the whole purpose of the Board of Pharmacy is not to protect pharmacists, it's to protect the public and to make sure that the public is safe. And my point being the NACC situation was not caused because new CGMP rules or any kind of other external rules weren't followed. It's because the basic rules of USP 795 and 797 were not followed by NACC in any way, shape, or form. And that's why many people got sick and died and are still sick from what happened. But had there been a enforcement in the state of Massachusetts for that errant pharmacy, and they were cited as early as 2002 as to what they were doing wrong. I don't want to go a history lesson, but I happen to know a lot about it. I've studied it. None of this would have happened, and we probably wouldn't be sitting here today. So, but once again, USP 795 and USP 797 has shown itself to be a very, very reliable set of guidelines for compounding pharmacies to go by. And I don't think you're going to find a single case other than perhaps a syringe situation, which was really out of our control because nobody knew that those components had been changed. You're not going to find a pharmacy that was in any way endanger the public by following those rules as prescribed. So I just want to point that out. And what piggybacks onto that, of course, is the sterility piece, where the USP compendial test is the recommended test, but it also mentions that any other validated type of sterility test, as long as you have good validated information, can be used. As was previously mentioned, more than 32 states have adopted USP 795 and 797 and are following these rules and have some very successful pharmacy practice within those states, including my domicile state of Florida. As far as the potency over time test versus the stability indicating tests, once again, there aren't, I know of no, and maybe the board does know of some situations where these tests actually made a difference in the outcome for a patient based on compounded medications that were sent out to them. But my experience, and I've been in this specific space of business for 12 years, and I know of no situation where testing potency over time caused any kind of a patient situation. Basically, that's all I want to say about that, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
North Tampa.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Modaiman Adab? Garden Grove Hospital? No? Okay. Laura Churns, Albertsons. I think we already heard from Laura already. Yes. And Rob Mullins from Rite Aid we heard from as well. Dieter Steinitz, Coast Compounding Pharmacy.
He spoke.
You already have already. Thank you. Thank you. Randy Berg, Spectrum Pharmacy Products. Henry Trong, Mariner. Erica Lopez, Spectrum Pharmacy Products? Nothing? Okay. David Smith, A&O Specialty Pharmacy?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you. You wanted some examples of perhaps patients, and a good example was in the pediatric patients. So I'm in Salinas, but my patient base is Monterey County, Santa Cruz County, and so you're dealing with a big county. So you're talking about making an oral suspension for a child 14 days. So now it's very difficult for that parent and us to coordinate on a 14-day cycle. It's very difficult. And I think this is when you look at pharmacist judgment. We have great literature. I mean, Trissel spent a lifetime, and we have good data, and we should use that data. That's because if a child needs Carvedilol, for blood pressure, I mean, it's going to, sometime on a weekend, they're going to run out. And that doesn't need to happen. And I think, a 30-day supply is in the good judgment, and that's what we have always done in the past. And so I think, again, a child might live in King City, and for us, that's 40 miles away. So getting that medicine to them. So if we could consider that, that would be very important.
David, you're talking about aligning with USP 795.
Yes, exactly,
Great.
795.
For
yes.
oral compounds.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Shanam Zond. No comment? Okay. David Kazarian, Pharmetric Lab and InfuServe America. Good
That
morning.
was a mouthful, huh?
Yes. Did I say it
Thank
okay?
you. Thank you. I'd like to give you a little background information quickly. I've been practicing pharmacy for, if I make it to October this year, 53 years.
So are you represent?
When
Wow.
I
Are you have a pharmacy or are you a lab?
Yes,
Both. Both. Okay.
I represent two different companies. Now, I'm going to put on my Pharmetric hat. Pharmetric Laboratory. We are a laboratory that tests medication for sterility. Wearing my Pharmetric hat, I would urge the board to consider harmonizing your regulations with those found in the USP, considering alternative methods for all release testing, including sterility testing. We use bioluminescence, which is acceptable as an alternative method in the USP. A quote from the USP 1223 states, "The USP has long provided mechanisms for the implementation of alternative assay methods or procedures to analyze compendial articles." Federal Register, May 3rd, 2012. Since we last clarified and updated our regulations governing sterility testing, advances in technology in recent years have allowed the development of new sterility testing methods that yield accurate and reliable test results in less time and with less operator intervention than the currently prescribed methods. Some examples of novel methods include adenosine triphosphate bioluminescence. That's what we use at Pharmetric Lab. Now I'm going to take my Pharmetric hat off and put on my InfuServe hat. Wearing my InfuServe hat, I would first like to thank the California Board of Pharmacy for information when we call. I was amazed when I called the Board of Pharmacy, they actually answered the phone.
We want to give you Victor Laws.
Yes.
We want you to call him and tell him.
Yes.
And I'd also like to specifically thank Dr. Christine Acosta for her guidance and answering many of our questions. Now, in our efforts to keep people safe, in some instances, we may be harming more than we're helping. If we increase the price to a price point where a person just can't afford the medication, are we helping or are we harming? When we use subjective methods, oh, I'm going to look at this. Is it clear or is it cloudy? Let's see, I just made 300 vials. Oh yeah, that's clear. Are we helping or are we harming? How can we meet a 14-day BUD with a required 14-day sterility test? How does that happen? Superman can't fly backwards and turn the clock back. Recently, this happened last week. One of our Florida patients came to California. Her daughter required Benadryl, diphenhydramine, injections, 50 milligrams of diphenhydramine, 10 milligrams of normal saline IV push. That's what she was getting. She had a bag with 200 syringes loaded, ready to go. She forgot it in Florida. She came to California. We tried to help her. We called numerous pharmacies, compounding pharmacies. Nobody would do it. Nobody. What happened? A pharmacy sold her diphenhydramine and normal saline and a bunch of syringes, and she sat in her kitchen and compounded herself. Are we helping or are we harming? If we strive for absolute safety for all of the products we dispense, we may never allow patients to consume pharmaceuticals. Sometimes that may be a good thing, but that's another story. I would ask the board to please consider patients and assure and consider a balance of safety to allow patients to get needed pharmaceuticals rather than to think that we have to have absolute safety so that we won't create another Massachusetts conditions. I think what I see happening across the United States is a knee-jerk reaction. I asked a congresswoman in Tampa, I asked her, do you think you in the United States Congress knows more about our profession than we do? I pointed to pharmacists in the room. I said, do you think any of these people have not changed things that they were doing since that horrible thing happened in Massachusetts? I don't want to see my name in the paper. I don't want to go to jail. But my primary concern is that person that walks through the door and plops money down to get a prescription. I had a man leave our pharmacy. He needed some eye drops that had to be compounded. And when I told him what it would cost, and by the way, I priced it out at our cost because it was a one-time thing that he needed. He had an allergy to a preservative, and he had a corneal transplant. He couldn't afford it. He said to me when he left, I'm going to go blind, I don't care, and he walked out of the pharmacy. Please consider the patient.
Thank you. Cynthia Bennett, Marshall B. Ketchum. No comment? Judy Shin, Saddleback Memorial Medical Center. No comment. Kathy Vu, Share Ourselves. No comment. Shandy Jiang. No comment. Mark Johnston, CVS, we heard from Mark already. Tran Phan, RUHS Medical Center. Confusion, okay. Joshua Lee. He's gone? Okay. Douglas Barkon.
Good morning once again, board members. I'm going to probably ramble on this a little bit because I'm looking more at what was going on, going over the comments that were filed by the various organizations that made it out in the meeting materials and so forth. One of the things is that that came up is on the smoke studies as to what areas those should be in. Going through various USP sections, one of the things is that the smoke studies are typically they're going to be in the ISO 5 area, looking at unidirectional flow and where there's turbulence in that area. But also, part of the CETA guidelines in CAG 003-2006-13, which is the 2015 version, it hasn't changed all that much, but it's doubled in size from where it was. Anyway, one of the things is that between that and USP, it points out that smoke studies are necessary in other areas of the compounding area, which could be a clean room, the doors between the ante-room possibly and the buffer room, because measuring just the airflow with a manometer or something, that's going to give you some ideas on airflow. It doesn't tell you whether that airflow is turbulent, whether you have leaks or anything. It just shows you the airflow. And so the smoke studies need to actually incorporate more than just the Class 5 or ISO 5 areas and incorporate the entire clean room area. As for the segregated compounding area, perhaps not, because that's a separate area that's not really monitored too much. And so my point would be that for smoke studies, it should be the entire clean room and the ISO 5 area, looking for turbulence, looking for unidirectional flow, looking at dynamic conditions with people actually working in there, whether you have a compounding unit for TPN compounding stuck in your IV hood or isolator. Is there flow over the critical site on that? That's unidirectional. Is there turbulence being created there? Are hands and bottles getting in the way? So smoke studies do come into play in multiple areas. I know that a couple, 2-3 years ago, there was a comment that was made that smoke studies are dangerous. They're really not. It's a necessary thing that has to happen. Someone pointed out earlier today, I think it was CPHA about questioning, or it was Kaiser about questioning whether that would be the initial certification only. It should be every 6 months, and each time the rooms are certified, the smoke study should be done to see where you are. The video should be able to be stored on a DVD or something of your smoke studies, so they can reference back to those to show you to show you and the board inspectors, the certifiers, and so forth, where there's a problem, and it's great for training purposes also for your staff. So that was that part for the smoke studies. On the hazardous compounding or hazardous definition, going back, I think almost 3 years at this point, I brought up to the board about the definition of hazardous to include the entire NIOSH list, which was not just the antineoplastics, and that was passed over, I guess, each time that it wasn't necessary, and the board decided to go with antineoplastics only. It came up again today. I urge the board to reconsider that definition to include the entire NIOSH list of drugs. Let me see if I can find my notes here of which ones were here before my time runs out here. Let's see. Okay, but one of the versions that I came up with for 1735.1 for the definition of hazardous was that hazardous means all anti-neoplastic agents and other hazardous drugs as identified by the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, NIOSH, as meeting the criteria for a hazardous drug, and any other drugs, compounds, or materials identified as hazardous by the pharmacist in charge. So that put it all in there. So it basically requires the NIOSH list and doesn't make the pharmacist in charge responsible for selecting which drugs are considered hazardous or not, which is more of a staff safety issue versus anything else. And that's what I have here.
I'm sorry, your time.
Time is up. Thank you.
Thank you. Rachel Ponticus. Wedgwood Pharmacy, or we heard from Wedgwood Pharmacy. I think these are probably the same individuals. Fang Zhu Hamad, Riverside University Health System. No comment. Eric Feinstein, Exia Pharmacy. Do we have any more, or is that it? One gone through? Yeah, after all of them.
Thank you for having us here. I do want to say most of the points that we're interested in bringing up today have already been brought up, and not to reiterate. We did just want to say that probably the most important thing we would humbly request of the board is to make sure that any judgment passed, any resolution that's passed is scientific and logical, and again, not knee-jerk, as the gentleman who has an astounding 53 almost years of pharmacy experience has said. We want to make sure that we're doing things that make sense. And again, also, just because 2 minutes passed and a new year comes, BUD shouldn't change necessarily. Again, we want to really stress that the scientific basis for things needs to be appreciated in the matters the board tends to. Again, also from a scientific and logical explanation concerning the alternative microbial methods, California is known across the nation and the world as a forefront of innovation and technology. And if anything else, we would hope that the board would act in the best interest of the patients of this state, and agree that something that's technologically advanced, more than a 14-day test using a plate, which has been antiquated and shown to be inexact and inaccurate compared to a more modern method, would certainly be representative of California's ability to turn out technological innovations and to use technological innovations to forward the benefits of our patients. Lastly, a point that has not been brought up that we think is in line with the idea of using a scientific rationale and a logical rationale for things. According to CCR section 4127.7, it is stated that all compounding must be done in an ISO 5 environment from start to finish. Again, this doesn't make logical sense. Usually when you are compounding, as we do in our facility, high-risk compounds, you wouldn't want the high-risk non-sterile powders to aerosolize into the HEPA filters of an ISO 5 environment, get stuck there. That doesn't make any sense. You would do that in a fume hood in a buffer area, such as an ISO 7 area. You would do some sort of manipulation to sterilize, and after it's been wetted, so that there's no aerosolization of these potentially non-sterile powders in a very sterile area, and you would then bring it into an ISO 5 area for filling. We believe that it is not the intent of USP nor the FDA to have any such compounding done start to finish in an ISO 5 environment. And we would again humbly request that the board take a look at some of these points. There are others, but in the interest of time, we just wanted to bring that one up since that has not been brought up yet today. That scientifically sound, reasonable, logical decisions are made about the processes that are prescribed for us in the sterile compounding industry. Thank you.
What organization are you speaking on behalf of?
Axia Pharmaceutical, Westwood 503B.
Thank you. Kathy Andrusko-Furphy? No comment. Joe Gardner? Good Pharma Compounding Pharmacy? Good morning.
Hello, thank you for having this meeting. I probably share the distinction that I am probably the only pharmacist, the last time I checked in the state, that's also a pharmacist and a certified menopause practitioner with the North American Menopause Society. And 2 years ago at our meeting in Las Vegas, we were brought up to attention that there was a huge problem with older women, particularly, but a lot of women suffering with vulvovaginal atrophy. So the NAMS, or the North American Menopause Society, went on this big education plan to, number one, educate physicians to ask questions about this and educate consumers to bring this up. And we were successful. There was a huge amount of interest. Unfortunately, what happened, we were so successful that the price of the commercial vaginal creams all went up to $300 a tube. And so it created a real problem because in Medicare, almost all Part D plans do not cover hormones of any form. Now, for a year and a half, we've been trying to get Medicare to change those regulations, the Part D pharmacies to change that, but we've been really unsuccessful. So I have a lot of, actually, members of the practitioners of the North American Menopause Society that are looking into compounding alternatives. And this disproportionately affects older women. And so the woman finally gets up to talk to the doctor about this, and they discuss it. The doctor writes a prescription. She goes to her pharmacy to find out that her Part D plan doesn't cover it. It costs $300. So most of these creams are a twice a week dosage, a gram twice a week, 8 grams a month. So under the new BUD things, we can dispense 8 grams unless we have identical studies on BUD things, which is creating a huge, huge implement to women being treated. And it's basically really unfair for women. These women that, are suffering, it's a huge quality of life issue. Any of you in the pharmacist world know that most insurance companies are having a hard time covering this, unless you have the most golden Part D plan. So I applaud CPHA's recommendations to change the wording on the BUD. I think that that's a very important thing. And something else I didn't think of till I got here, Dieter's comment about the technician ratio. We put a person inside that negative pressure room all day long. It creates a real burden on doing other products. So that may be something to look forward to. But I would ask the board to consider adopting CPHA's wording on this so that it gives us a little bit more latitude with expiration dates. And thank you.
Thank you. Adam Landsman, Roadrunner, I think we already heard from them. Andrew Carroll, Loma Linda University Hospital. No comment? Sam and Anthony Barrack, Innovative Compounding Pharmacy. Sam and Anthony Barrack? Oh, yes, okay, great, thanks. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Where's your pharmacy?
We're in Murrieta, California.
Great, thanks.
We'd like to thank the board for having us all here, and we appreciate many of the comments that we've heard this morning are the same as our concerns. If you don't mind, I'd like to just step away from the topics just a little bit regarding a 503A pharmacies. Contrary to 503B, 503A is not a licensure or certification, but it's more of a designation that the FDA set. We commend our state board here in California as they have gone above and beyond to ensure a proven track record of safety for compounding pharmacies in California. We here, and all of us here, we are not NECC. We are not those who are dabbling in compounding. We are highly trained pharmacists who have specialized training in compounding. The FDA, in our opinion, should have no jurisdiction in California state licensed pharmacies unless upon a state board inspection, a pharmacy is found to be operating outside of the state laws or acting as a 503B pharmacy. Excuse my nerves. At such point, we believe the Board of Pharmacy should then, number one, enact a warning to correct any deficiencies. Number two, if not rectified, then issuance of a citation or a fine. Then number three, if continued noncompliance, probation or suspension. As a final option, we feel the board would then have at its discretion to refer to the FDA as they deem appropriate. In other words, we'd like to see the state board take control of the situation as they have been able to, and in making us all, we think, the most safe pharmacies in the country. And allowing FDA to kind of over or supersede we feel is not in the interest of our state. We think our state is above and beyond and has proven itself.
So
And-
if I could, I want to kind of tie it back to the agenda so that we stay on that
Yes,
topic.
please.
And so focusing on the board's compounding regulations, what is it that you're recommending there?
Well, we'd just like to make it a more clear pathway for FDA involvement or regulate or jurisdiction on a 503A pharmacy in California,
Are you talking about whether the FDA regulates 503As? Is that what you're?
or inspects.
Okay, so that is not on our agenda.
I
And-
understand.
And our attorney's looking to we have to make sure, because of the regulations we fall under, we have to follow the agenda items.
Okay.
So we have to follow what is on there.
It's just something I'd like to bring to the attention, that,
If you'd like to suggest that we consider that for a future agenda, you can certainly do that. That's why we have the public comment period at the beginning of the meeting.
okay, I appreciate that.
Okay.
Well, part of this ties to the fact that, and someone alluded to this earlier, as pharmacies, we all here are acting in good faith to serve the public. We're not adverse to corrective action when necessary. However, we kind of feel like there should be some motivation as well for pharmacies that are in good standings, as a means of cost control, which was alluded to earlier. As these regulations and as they compound upon each other, the cost control has gone out of control, and it's no longer accessible for patients. We'd like to submit that at the discretion of a Board of Pharmacy inspector, a pharmacy may be granted a 2-year sterile license as a means of cost control, with appropriate annual fees paid, of course. Also, at the discretion of the Board of Pharmacy inspector, the 6 months recertification of clean rooms, that they might be extended upon annual certifications if all is in order. If a pharmacy has deficiencies, obviously, then they would have to revert to a 6-month. But these systems are.
So I think, one, your time is up, and then two, if you want to, I think you need to tie it back to the regulations, because you're talking about licensing rules, from what I'm hearing.
If you can tell us what specific regulations your comments are, because that's what's on the agenda today.
Okay.
On the specific sterile
Maybe I'll put
compounding.
this in writing for a different
Yeah,
time.
that'd be great.
I appreciate your comment there.
Thank you.
Do you mind if I just cover one more or two item quickly?
Is it on the agenda? Is it regarding
Yes.
a regulation?
Yes, I
Okay.
believe that it is.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
We do applaud the State Board of Pharmacy for their efforts in patient and safety.
Oh, that's okay.
But, and again, I believe that you're looking at a group of pharmacists that are here to fight for their livelihoods. Please do not regulate us out of business and deny access to our patients. We are not a group that has caused harm to our patients. In 20 years of business at ICP, we've dispensed millions of preparations. We were testing our products before it was even required. We've never caused an infection or an injury. We have never grown a bacteria or detected a pyrogen upon testing. Process validation does matter, and we propose that with proven validation in place, along with appropriate recall procedures in place, that we can be allowed to, within our professional judgment, release a sterile preparation prior to the completion of a 14-day sterility test. This was allowed in the prior law, but we think that that's been changed, and we just want to know really why there was that change, why that change was made to not allow us to release at our professional judgment during that 14-day.
I think what we're also trying to say is that we should let the pharmacists here are all professionals. We all have licenses. We all have extra training. So, I mean, sometimes there's judgment calls that have to be made. So we're all in compliance and agreement with the testing, but there's those situations that come up periodically where it's going to cause harm if something isn't released. As long as you have proper process validation in place, we talk a lot about process validation and quality assurance, and we have years of process validation to back that up. So we think it's safe in those instances to go ahead and release so that there's not patient harm caused at those times. And I hear people talking about the smoke studies and things like that in the clean rooms. There's professional companies that do those for you. So you hire those companies and they come in and we leave that to those professionals. They're certified to do that. Sure. They're certified to do that. So we would ask the board to let us be the professionals that we are and make those professional judgments at those critical times. We do sterile compounding at our pharmacy. We've done thousands of preps. And we have the process validation in place. There's one specific area that the law talks about when you're puncturing in a sterile vial in an ISO class 5 hood. I think right now it's written that vial is only good for 6 hours. Well, that's not even a full day's work. I would ask to at least have that changed or considered changed to 12 hours if it's left inside the ISO class 5 hood. I think that's a big deal.
Again, it's a cost containment issue, and we don't believe it to be unsafe. I think the rules before were 24 hours.
I think that's standard in most hospitals. I think our board has done a great job, and I agree with a lot of the regulations in trying to keep things under wraps and under control. But at some point, it gets down to costs for our patients and the people that we're servicing. And it doesn't seem fair. We have a lot of veterinarian clients that come into our pharmacy as well, and they've been getting our preps for years. And a lot of the fixed oils are nice in some cases, but you can't, it's hard to put a blanket, I'm talking about BUD now, so it's hard to put a blanket expiration date because every drug is different, as we all know. 180 days the way it was great, but again, it gets back to professional judgment, and we didn't always use 180 days. Sometimes it was 90, sometimes it's 30, but I'd like to ask the board to consider those instances because every drug is different and every compound is different. We all know that here, and I think every pharmacist in this room would agree with that.
So do you do human compounding or vet compounding?
We do both.
Both?
Yeah.
Okay, for human compounding, what general references do you use to establish BUD before January 1st, 2017?
Well, we had based our expiration dates, number one, on many years of experience, but more than that, references from PCCA, and as mentioned earlier, Trissels, Remingtons, and those sources go on, and they've been compiled over years. And they were always noted on our formulations where we derived those. But now we're left in a position where we have a patient that was getting something in 2016, or a physician that had been prescribing something with us for years of building this trust, and we've shot our own credibility
Right,
in
I
the
was just
foot.
questioning just what references you commonly use, and I think
Right.
Valerie may have a question.
I think something's wrong with my microphone, but, okay, I'm going to try. For veterinary medication, what are the references that you use then for compounding? Is there any references, like, you have your reference guides for human compounding? What do they use for veterinary medications?
Many of the drugs are the same, so you still use Trissels, Remingtons. PCCA is a great resource. They have BUDs on many of their formulations, but they also have recommendations that are built on years of experience in process validation.
Are there any veterinary-specific products? I know there are some vet-only drugs that are not human. What are the references you use for vet, commonly used?
I believe those are the same references. Tristle still does reference those medications and those drugs. And so does Remington's, to my knowledge.
But the messages that we're sending to our patients when they come into our pharmacies for animal or human use is that, last year, that things were good for a certain amount of period. Now we have to explain to them that it's only good for this amount of time. So are they wondering, well, what were you doing last year? And how come I was given that and you said it was good for 60 days last year and now it's only good for 14?
It really speaks to the credibility, to our credibility.
To our whole profession.
To the whole profession.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I
Thanks
have one
for
more.
your-
I have one more point, if you'll indulge me.
Okay, I think you've gone over the 5
I know
minutes
that I
several
have.
times.
This will be quick, I promise.
Okay.
It's in regards to, and now I'm a little warmed up, so you can't shut me down now. My nerves have kind of gone away. This is regarding. This was alluded to earlier. The definition of hazardous drugs, and specifically regarding tables 1, 2, and 3 of the NIOSH list. We propose, and we believe that everyone in this room would agree that Table 1 drugs, that's the drugs list that includes the cytotoxic and anti-neoplastic drugs. But we would also have to agree that these drugs are not the same as Table 2 and 3 drugs, which would include drugs like progesterone and estrogen. Remember, these drugs are used vaginally in pregnant women. Are we to tell those patients that their drugs are hazardous? I mean, are they on those lists? Yes, because they are category, highly rated categories for pregnancy and in breastfeeding mothers. But to say that they're the same as cytotoxic and anti-neoplastic drugs and they have to be handled in the same fashion doesn't really make sense. We agree that maybe they should be done under negative conditions and in negative hoods. We agree with that. But really, to garb in the fashion that you would garb for cytotoxic and anti-neoplastic drugs, we would ask that you would reconsider that and leave more of that up to the discretion and professional judgment of the pharmacist.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else?
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks to both of you. Is there anyone else here that did not sign up that would like to provide some comments? Okay. Good morning.
Good morning. This is going to be very brief. My name is Bob Brensel. I'm president of a pharmacy called ScriptWorks in Walnut Creek, California. I just wanted to talk briefly about stability of suspensions. This is what we use very commonly in veterinary world. And I think sometimes I think that the stability of aqueous solutions gets mixed in with the stability of suspensions. And when I go back to chemistry class, and what I've learned is basically that the more insoluble the compound, the more stable it is in a suspension. The more soluble it is, the less stable. And in my testing, in my Beyond Use State testing that I've done for many years, it goes true. If you take furosemide and try to put it into an aqueous suspension, you might get 30 days. If you take a product like prednisolone acetate, we've tested it at 6 months at 100%. So I think that you have to be careful about mixing up solutions and suspensions when you're talking about aqueous. I'm not a chemist, I'm a pharmacist, but just my interns, they spend half their internship just doing research on stability. So that we're trying, and this is my point, is that so that we'll be able to make decisions. We want to be able to make decisions, conservative decisions, for the benefit of our patients. And that's all I'm asking, is to allow pharmacists to make conservative decisions within, as opposed to just saying 14 days on beyond use states. That's it.
Thank you. Anyone else want to come up?
Hi.
Good morning.
My name is Sarah Bonsante, and I represent Loudon Compounding Pharmacy. We're a small business in Capitola on the Central Coast. I'm not a pharmacist. I am a technician, but I have over 23 years in the business. And so one point that everybody hasn't really talked about, but I think applies because it does directly affect patient care and whether or not we will be able to service those patients, is the cost involved. Since coming on board as a quality assurance specialist with my pharmacy, I've been doing a lot of reading because the bulk of my experience was with retail, not with compounding pharmacy. And what I'm seeing a lot on the verbiage coming out from the board is a comment about we don't have any research on how this is going to impact small businesses. So I would argue that the bulk of the compounding is small businesses, right? Most of us have 50 or less employees. And so the cost involved in doing the BUD studies, the cost involved in doing the stability studies, the costs, involved in having to charge our patients more because we're having to make things more frequently is not something that's being addressed. I feel it's not something that's being addressed. Because again, there's no research done on your end in regards to who's a small business and who's not. And so if, in addition, the doubling of the fees for licensure renewal, the building of the HD room that we're all going to have to do, this is a huge cost impact, and I think it's going to put a lot of our smaller businesses, community pharmacies, compounding pharmacies, out of business, which would directly affect our patient care because then the service isn't available for them. So I would ask that maybe some study be done on how many of the compounders are indeed small businesses so that we can have more of an idea of the impact that the financial side of it will have.
So given that that's not on our agenda, we can just take that as a public comment.
I'm sorry.
And thank you. No.
I was late. Thank you.
Come on up.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Robert Easton, Scripps Health. So my comments are specific to 1751, sterile compounding record keeping requirements. This has been brought up a couple times. Just to comment regarding the video of smoke studies. So when the regulations went into effect on January 1st, we immediately contacted the company that does the certification for the Scripps Health hospitals. And initially we were told that, we're not set up to do it because we read it and interpreted it as all ISO classified areas. So not just your primary engineering controls, your ISO 5 areas, but also your ISO class 7 buffer area, your ISO 7 and 8 anti areas. And so we said, well, we need to do smoke studies of the buffer room and anti area as well. And the certifier said, well, we're not ready to do that. So through continuous conversations, they are kind of at a place where they think they can do it. Some of the impacts that I didn't think about at the time was, if we're going to do these smoke studies, the certification company was saying that you will need to, and so this is in a hospital environment, you will need to put your fire alarm system in test mode. So we have to disable it because the amount of smoke that we'll have to generate to get visualization of the smoke, it's not just going to stay in the pharmacy. It's going to go elsewhere. So you'll probably also want to tell people, make it alert. So I've become more familiar with the facilities folks of Scripps Health and what this, for better or for worse. And so to talk about that, and they're like, well, we can take all these steps, but you're going to need to, there's a lot of other steps. Not saying that we couldn't do it, but it's a lot more complicated. It would also obviously take down the compounding of the pharmacy for the duration of the smoke study. We also would probably want to do a 3-time cleaning of the buff room and ante area. And so my comments are just, with the current language, there's a little bit of interpretation of what specific areas. We currently do video of smoke studies with our primary engineering controls certification every 6 months, and we keep that on file, and so we're able to demonstrate that. I guess my request or recommendation is that maybe the language be very specific to ISO classified class 5 areas. I think what you're trying to do with all this record keeping is demonstrate your ability to maintain your state of control. I think with environmental sampling, differential pressures, we're able to do that. And so while I will we continue to do the smoke studies of the ISO class 5? I would say maybe if the language would be restricted to those areas every 6 months with the primary engineering control.
So you're in agreement with the board staff recommendations that we limit this to ISO class 5 every 6 months?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Let me ask you one quick question.
Of course.
Reiterate what you said about the impact on the fire alarm system in the hospital.
So when I spoke with the certification, he said you'd want to turn it off because you might set it off. So I know, and I'm going to get out of my depth here pretty quick because I don't know the setting of a fire watch and what that means for a hospital. But basically, it was, yeah, we're going to want to, in effect, have it disabled for the duration because that smoke can potentially the amount of smoke that will need to be generated is not just going to stay in the pharmacy or even in the buffer room.
It sounds significant. I can't imagine. I don't know who would, OSHPOT or OSHA or fire marshal even.
That's why they limit it to every 6 months.
Yeah.
and They do it only in the ISO 5
Yeah.
class.
Yeah.
area,
Yeah,
right.
Which is what he was.
Yeah.
Exactly. Just not it because we just read, we said, well, it sounds like every classified area. So, okay. Thank you. Mhm.
Thanks. Good morning.
Good morning. Hi, Eric Clausen from Golden Gate Veterinary Compounding Pharmacy again. I just wanted to address a question you asked the earlier guys about veterinary pharmacy references. They were correct. Trissels, tons of great references that can be utilized as well as ASHP. One of the best ones though is the USP monographs. There's probably a couple dozen USP monographs for veterinary products. Almost all of them are aqueous based with extended beyond use stating. The difficulty with the way the regs are written in referencing those currently is the identical discussion that we had earlier. Having to match those formulations 100% identically is near impossible, although they have stability indicating studies backing them the majority of the time, and they are really the gold standard for what we should be referencing.
This is identical versus analogous discussion that
Yeah.
took place?
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Thank you.
Hi,
Good
sorry, I was
morning.
inching my way up here. My name is Grace Magaman from the Children's Hospital of Orange County. And I'd just like to lend a pediatric perspective. I know there's been organizations, we're a fairly large organization, and it's, all the impacts that we discuss around cost. It's not just the small businesses, it's the huge organizations as well. Two things I'd like to mention specifically, as it adds on to the identical versus analogous description, I would ask that that be considered, especially in the light of our situation around shortages and the impact of shortages, not just from the raw materials, for example, sodium bicarbonate, but also things such as glass bottles. Some of the studies that were done for our oral compounding was done in glass bottles, but there's a severe shortage on that, and they're breakable. And so what do we do to stay compliant with what is required, but continue to provide access to our patients? Some of the options that we've tried to explore are trying to find other compounds or other medications that might be commercially available. That also has its trickle-down impacts as far as price and access to our patients. The second piece that I wanted to bring up, and there may be some that might disagree with me, but I agree with clarifying the language regarding the definition of a hazardous drug, but I actually am in agreement with the way that the board has written the current section R, in the sense that the three NIOSH tables are to manage those as all hazardous equivalent to anti-neoplastic agents is extremely prohibitive and burdensome for any organization, a hospital, for example, in mind. We took a specific example like phosphonatoin that happens to fall on the table 2. And while it's a tremendous pressure as well as a responsibility for the pharmacist in charge to have to own the responsibility of identifying these agents, if we don't have the ability to specify which ones should be exceptions, the impact to patient care is also something that we'll own. For example, phosphonatoin is an anti-epileptic medication, something that helps to stop seizures. If I were to treat that as an anti-neoplast or hazardous and had to go into the compounding room the chemo room to compound that, the time that it would take for me to garb up and compound that medication, get it up to the unit, and especially in the sense when we're taking a look at our compounding hazardous agents using closed system transfer devices, that adds all those elements add on time. Then you add on the fact that the nurse has to garb up and go through her processes to be able to administer the drug in the, NIOSH compliant, OSHA compliant way. That could be 30, 40 minutes of a patient that's actively seizing, and that could have a tremendous impact on their demise. So I would ask that the board stay consistent with USP 800, but still allow us afford us the ability to make those exceptions when it would negatively impact patient care. And I believe that that is actually consistent with the USP 800 as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Before you go, could you expound a little bit on the sodium bicarb situation?
Sure, and specifically as it relates to compounding, which is on the agenda, I hope. The sodium bicarb is on national shortage. So we have one manufacturer that is basically able to source it, and for a variety of reasons, it's not available. We've had multiple conversations with our GPR, Group Purchasing Organization, with the company about how to make these products available or how to access these products. We are hearing that it's not going to be available till late August, which is huge for us in the sense that, this is I'm sure everybody here knows from the inpatient pharmacy standpoint, but this is a critical medication for methotrexate chemotherapy toxicity clearing. It is also used in our oral suspensions or oral solutions for our omeprazole and lansoprazole, which is our proton pump inhibitors. And then, adding on a very restrictive BUD to that, when we don't even have the raw supplies, how are we supposed to care for our patients when the drugs are already on short supply? And so in those instances, there's been discussion in the profession around, do we take our common baking soda and use that to compound the base solution for these oral compounds? And I cringe at the thought of that, but when we're kind of left to figure out how to operate and continue providing patient care in these dire situations, it becomes really difficult to stay compliant with laws that may not allow us that option.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dana Gordon. I own Central Avenue Pharmacy in Pacific Grove. And first I want to say that I completely support CPHA's recommendations to the changes in the language for everything. We are a non-sterile pharmacy. The biggest concern for me is the BUD. The justification of extending that at a limited level. I think potency over time is sufficient. I think literature references are sufficient. I think we have to remember that, to the best of my recollection, everybody in this room, with few exceptions, are pharmacists. We are not pharma. We are not manufacturers. To hold us to those standards, which a lot of these new regulations are having us do, is next to impossible. Providing access of care with the limitations that are being put upon us is difficult. In my practice, where we would have a turnaround of 24 hours, maybe 48 hours max, it's 7, 10, sometimes 15 days, because we have to make everything one at a time. And I know you've heard all this before, but just keep in mind, there's going to be special interests in which people want these methodology studies for non-sterile is what I'm interested in. But out in the real world, in the trenches, I think as a practicing pharmacist, you do have to allow some judgment on behalf of us.
Thank you.
Sure.
Joe Gardner from Good Pharma Compounding Pharmacy. The gentleman that brought up the progesterone made me think of something. The new regulations say if we accept estradiol as a NIOSH hazardous substance, we have to put a warning on the prescription label that says hazardous material, dispose of property. So I'd like to ask the pharmacist and the board what they would tell to the woman who comes into the pharmacy who suffered 3 miscarriages, and even though it's not her fault, she feels guilty as can be. She comes in for a progesterone suppository, and you slap a label on it and says hazardous material, dispose of improperly. She said, is this going to hurt my baby? What do the pharmacist and the board tell that patient, tell that woman? Think about it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, hearing no other comments.
Yeah, I was going to just make a
Yes.
All right, stopping everybody from lunch. This is Christine Versicle. I'm with Dynalabs. We're an analytical lab in St. Louis, Missouri. Just a couple of comments were made earlier relative to injectables and syringes. And just so you know, we've had recent incidences where there are syringes from various companies we receive that we test, and they're constantly changing the preservatives, so that impacts the results of the testing. So, you know, to say that one syringe is one syringe and is another is ever changing. In addition to that, a lot of the retail pharmacies, because the new regs are required to submit a potency test, and a lot of them compound Magic mouthwash, and there aren't a lot of labs that can actually test the ingredients in that, or one active in that. So it's difficult, and we kind of ask that they submit a test that is something other than what they might mostly compound, which is that compound. In addition, I think, just to let you know, since January 1st, your new regs that went into place, we've had, from California alone, about 5,000 samples, and the potency tests, as far as failure rates, were 1.8%, and sterility, endotoxin, and particulate matter, 0% failures. So, good job. So I think that speaks a lot to the regulations, and I do have a paper that is real specific to, that I'll share with you via email, and really has great definitions. It was from USP related to potency, the definitions of potency over time, and stability, and sterility.
Thank you. Any other comments? Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Trish Cook. I'm from Taylor's Pharmacy, compounding pharmacy in Florida. I just want to emphasize the importance of all the comments that have been made on regards to beyond use dating, potency over time, and alternatives to sterility methods other than the compendial methods in the USP. But I also wanted to bring up one other thing that hasn't been mentioned yet, and that is section 1735.8 regarding compounding quality assurance. In section C, there is a statement that reads, "The quality assurance plan shall include a schedule for routine testing and analysis of specified compounded drug preparations to ensure integrity, potency, quality, and labeled strength on at least an annual basis." I think that's a very ambiguous statement that is open to a lot of interpretation, and I would just really like clarification from the board on what exactly that entails. If it's just non-sterile or sterile products, every single product, those are kind of important things that need to be clarified.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Okay, if not, we'll move over into reviewing. And what I recommend we do, board members just go over each of the items, make a, kind of give some guidance to the staff on how we want the language to be modified, and then have them bring it back for the next meeting.
What are you going to use as?
So we're going to use the, on page 2 that we have, which is the staff recommended sections, and then we'll go into the in the ones that we've gotten in writing.
Okay, good.
So the first one I have on here is section 1735, relating to activities that do not constitute compounding. And in here, the board staff recommends that we remove the, that we basically modify the language so that the mixing of ingredients from a compounding kit purchased from an FDA-approved manufacturer needs to be included, does not have to be in defined as compounding. So I think that's actually something I think Alan brought up before as well.
So do you want this to be an action item?
Yes, I actually, if you can get a motion. So moved, second?
Second.
Alan, you, of course you're going to second that, right? It was your idea. Okay, any public comment regarding this item? Okay, all in favor? Yes, okay. Oh, we have public comment. Come on up. Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Thought he's voting with us. A little slow, sorry. Hi, thank you for hearing me again. I had a question regarding this item, that there's now a company that's producing dilutions that are FDA approved that they would then mix with the cream, as an example, like an estradiol or a progesterone dilution that you would buy as an FDA approved product, and then you would dilute it into a cream base. Is this regulation going to cover those products, or
Can
only
you
the actual
forward
kits?
those examples to the board that we can review those?
Yeah, I will find them and forward them to you.
Okay, thank you. Very informative.
Hi, Jenny Partridge. I'm a compounding pharmacist. And just a comment on these, some of those kits do contain hazardous materials. So I would want to make sure if they don't fall under the definition of compounding, they do fall under the definition of hazardous, and that will go into effect July 1st, 2018, when USP Chapter 800 takes place, because they're active chemicals, testosterone and progesterone, are on our hazardous list.
Or we could make the definition non-hazardous.
There you go.
kits.
Thank you.
Okay, are you okay to amend your motion to be non-hazardous kits?
I would, and I'm assuming that my second would feel the same.
Oh, exactly.
You're fine with that? Okay, all in favor? Okay, the next one is regarding 1735.2I, and that's related to the BUD requirements. So the board staff is recommending changes to the establishment of the BUD to more closely align with the requirements of USP 795 for non-sterile products. So what that would mean, Stan, is that we would, instead of having this, and we've heard so much about it today, and we've heard about it before, that instead of it being 14 days for an aqueous solution, that the pharmacy can use published studies or evidence in alliance with 795.
Yeah, I understand that, and this was more of a question for our council. When we use the term more closely align, is that going to be acceptable? If we, when we
I
use
think
it,
it's just guidance for them to propose language to us.
Okay.
They'll modify it. So when we say more closely aligned, that's just our direction.
Good.
And then they'll modify the language and
Okay.
bring it back to us.
I'm good with it. Thank you. And I'll move it if you like.
Okay. You'll second it.
I'm glad they put us next to each other.
You two make a good team. Any public comment on this? All in favor?
Now, that would be a applause.
Yes! All right. The next one is 1751.1, and that is regarding the smoke studies and the sterile compounding record-keeping requirements. Staff recommends clarifying the requirements for the smoke studies so that we reference ISO Class 5 only, as well as the frequency, which is semi-annually. Is there a motion in regards to that?
I'll move it.
Second, Valerie. Okay. Any public comment? All in favor? Oh, wait, we have public comment. Yes.
You have to come forward.
You need to come forward, please. Yes. If you could come forward, please.
This is Nayan Patel from Central Drugs Compounding Pharmacy in La Habra. And I was just looking at my GMP regulations right now. According to GMP for smoke studies for ISO 5 conditions, you do it at the beginning of the facility is open for the very first time. And subsequent studies are only done when there's a change in the facility or the hood's been changed. Every 6 months requirement for smoke study, I think, is too far-fetched and is way above and beyond what GMP requires us to do. So the board has gone to the point where it's required more than what GMP does at this point. So I would like the board to reconsider doing the smoke studies just once at the opening of the facility, and subsequently when there's a change in a hood or a facility has been changed or there's some renovation that has been done, you can repeat the smoke studies again at that point.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Chuck, did you have a comment back here about that? No? Okay.
You need to come
Can you come up forward, please, Jenny? So when you're saying what, what is consistent, that every 6 months? Or,
What your board staff has recommended, which is a smoke study in an ISO 5 environment semi-annually, is consistent and harmonized with USP 797.
thank you. Okay, any more public comment? All in, oh wait, we have one? Yes?
Hi, Douglas Barcon, pharmacist, once again. Back to the smoke studies issue, I'd suggest that rather than just specifying, limiting it to the ISO Class 5 environments, that it should also fall under that CAG 003-2006 guidelines for the certifying groups, and that you don't exclude doing smoke studies for other areas in the compounding environment. So you can limit it if you want, I would say extend it based on the certifier's recommendations or requirements to comply with their guidelines, that it extends out beyond just the ISO Class 5 environments.
Thank you. All in favor? All right, moving on. 1751.4, Facility and Equipment Standards for Sterile Compounding. Staff recommends clarifying that cleaning must be done wherever hazardous drugs are being compounded, as well as clarifying where the cleaning must occur. And we'll get the actual language when the staff brings it back. Valerie, motion? Second? All right, second. Public comment. Okay, all in favor? All right, we're on a roll here. Okay, moving on to the CPHA and International Academy of Compounding Pharmacists. The first one is amend the definition of daily, and I actually would like to get staff input on that as well, on what actually is that recommendation of moving to daily. If we can research it and bring it
Yeah,
back?
I do think that that might also just be kind of an FAQ clarifying that that's acceptable.
Okay. All right. Is that okay? We could just have them research it and bring it back to us? Yeah. And then the next one is amend the definition of a dosage unit to beyond one administration. I think we asked CPHA to give us some examples on the non-sterile to sterile, and we can have that and then bring it back for the next meeting. Is that okay? The third one is add a definition of sterility. And do we have staff input on that? In terms of what, or should we have that researched?
I think we'd like the opportunity.
Okay, opportunity to research and bring that back on the sterility. Where was my page here? Okay, the next one is, we already talked about the BUD requirements and change requirements related to the extension of BUD provisions to what appears to be, the analogous versus identical ingredients. Are we okay with making that change, or do we need staff to research that?
We'd benefit from the opportunity to research.
Okay. All right, bring that back. And 1735.25, correct the drafting error where the board inadvertently indicated that shorter dating can be done. Is staff okay with that?
So I think we need to research it because when we were looking, the prior version of the regulation had that provision in it as well, just in a different section. So I think we want to make sure that we understand the difference.
Is that okay? All right, 1735.26, request recognition of potency over time study as applicable to the compounded formulations can be used to validate stability and assign extended BUD dates. Do we want to have staff research that as well?
Yes, please.
Okay, is that okay? Board members, okay. 1751.1 is a smoke studies, which we've already just reviewed. 1751.4D, clarify that cleaning does not need to happen daily, but rather every day. This facility is used to prepare sterile drug compounds. I mean, I actually want the staff to review this, because I remember a case we had where the compounding was done maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks, and how does that impact the cleaning?
Yeah, so we'll research this and then try to consider the different compounding environments when we make a recommendation.
Okay. Sure.
I just want to clarify, I want to make sure that, Rick Rose with the University Compounding Pharmacy, when you're making a decision on that, we think of cleaning as, regular room, but in a clean room, it's actually cleaner when you don't go into the room. So I think it's important to note that, if you're not in the room, it's not like it's getting dirty. You have HEPA filter. It's actually cleaner when you're not going in, so.
A good point.
Yes.
Thank you. 1751.4K, remove the minimum room temperature requirement. I remember this actually came from Critical Point, because they claim that there are issues where if it's too hot, you can cause more introduction into the environment.
Yeah, so we have had an opportunity to research this, and we believe that removing the minimum temperature would be fine, and it would be consistent with USP.
Okay, just not the maximum?
Correct.
So can we get some language regarding that for the next edition? Is that okay, board members? Okay, the next one is correct typo by removing redundant sterile and indicate the training can vary for someone only directly supervising individuals compounding, not performing it themselves. Staff feeling on that?
I think that we'd like to have the opportunity to discuss with council what those ramifications would be before we provide a recommendation.
Is that okay, board members? All right. The next one is 1751.7E1, allow for an equivalent method of testing as those described in USP 71 and exempt pyrogen testing from irrigation. I actually would like a technical review on that. Can we ask staff to review that and bring back recommendations? I mean, we just got these too, so I don't think you've had the opportunity to really review them. Is that okay, board members? Okay. I'll turn it over to Alan for the Kaiser recommendations.
I appreciate that. Okay. 1735.1R and 1735.6E, requests changing the hazardous provisions to mirror the requirements in USP 800.
Now, not that Kaiser brought it, but I know we've heard a lot of comments about it, and it's been controversial. Some people believe that we should have everything under NIOSH as hazardous. Others believe, like the last one we just heard, that we shouldn't. We should give it up to, our current regulations allow the pharmacist in charge to make that determination. Does the staff have a feeling about this?
So I think we would like the opportunity to kind of vet it a little bit more now that we've had the benefit of the discussion from the regulated public.
Oh, right, yeah, more clarification is definitely in order on that. Okay. 2, request clarification on smoke study environments. I think we've already covered that, haven't we? We have. 3, 1751.4D, request the regulations specify that ready-to-use germicidal detergent, including sterile water, is acceptable. I think we need some more.
Well, I do think that that could probably be clarified through an FAQ.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, some of these we can actually go to FAQ with as well.
Okay. Number 4, 1751.4G1, requests addition of requirement for 2 pairs of standard gloves for all hazardous compounding, assuming that the hazardous drug stands for hazardous.
HD.
HD stands for hazardous.
Yeah.
So
unless you think you need more.
I think that we'd like to just double check our research on this one. I do think that USP 800 does say 2 gloves, but I believe the outer pair needs to be sterile.
Okay, I'll withdraw my.
But it's Valiant. Number 5, 1735.3 and 1751.4, request clarification on the need for sampling for the segregated compounding areas outside the ISO 5 environment. Question, is the sampling plan and procedures for non-viable particle samples, as well as violation of air and service, limited to ISO certified areas, or does it also apply to the segregated compounding area outside the ISO environment? We definitely need some.
Yeah, so I think we'd like to talk to council to see if that can be treated as an FAQ and or if it requires a modification.
Okay, number 6, request clarification if a pharmacy can contact with another pharmacy for compounded products or just parenteral?
That's a statutory provision. We'll confer with council.
Great.
All right, Letco Medical, 1735.2I, the board's interpretation of identical is too limiting. And I'm trying to bring up that recommendation just to see what that was.
I think it goes to the analogous versus identical.
Oh,
So
okay.
we'll be doing some research.
We've
in that
already
area.
addressed that one. Okay, and then Rite Aid, this is about the costs. I think we've already talked about that. That must be the 795 recommendation. Oh, no, it actually was 1735.8, which is actually a little different. And they want to exempt non-sterile products from an potency analysis for pharmacy.
And I believe that members of the public are going to provide us with examples of those so that we can consider it to see how there's a way to craft it if the committee so desires.
Perfect. Is that okay, board members? Yes. Rick Rhodes, 1735.1R, harmonize the definition of hazardous to mirror we just talked about that, the USP 800. That was the same recommendation we just had. 1735.1, add a definition of stability. Boards?
I think
Staff?
we want to look at the USP in that area and just make sure whether or not it's necessary and/or how to move forward.
Okay. 1735.2 I3, change the requirements to extend, I think we've already talked about that one already, in terms of the BUD changes.
So Amy, the I3 is different, I think, than the one that we discussed a little bit earlier, which was the
Okay.
non-sterile.
So what is and the difference, Ann, is?
I believe I3 is as it's currently written, applies to all, and I believe that there's comments, and I think staff
Oh, for
agrees
sterile?
that it should apply just to sterile, so it would be a recommendation to add sterile and to clarify.
And is this the only request we received to extend this to sterile?
I think that CPHA had comments, and I think it was a theme, if I'm remembering correctly. I don't want to misrepresent, but I think that it was a theme.
So can we have staff review that?
Yes.
Is that okay, board members? 1735.6E and 1751.4G1, create an exception allowing a pharmacy to perform an assessment, determine alternative containment strategies for hazardous drugs that are not antineoplastics. Staff input?
We're going to need to research that.
Okay. 1751.3C, provide detailed description of the information of the SOPs to include sterilization and depyrogenation processes. Staff review?
Yeah, we'll need to review it, and I'm not sure that that requires regulation. We'll have to look.
Okay. And then also for 1751.11, add the provision to establish the requirements for sterilization and depyrogenation.
Yeah, I think that those are provisions in the proposed new USP that's still out. So that might
Oh.
be something that we consider once USP finishes its work as well.
Yeah.
But we'll look at it, whether or not we think it needs to be taken in down.
Well, the other thing I think we need to do when the staff reviews it, if it's going to be issued, if it's an issue that is going to be in the new USP 797, we might as well just defer until that gets issued and finalized. Roadrunner 1735, we talked about USP already on the extension of the BUD. 1735.2A require to document a prescriber's authorization to remove the requirement to document a prescriber's authorization to compound a product. Staff's belief on that?
So I don't know that we have a recommendation per se. I think that part of the issue is, I believe that the ask specifically is for vet products. And so it's whether or not there should be an exemption in the law for those kinds of products. Our law does not make a differentiation, nor does USP 795 or 797. So we can further vet it if you'd like.
Okay. 1735.2, make stability, container closure, sterility, and testing frequency consistent with USP standards. Can we review that, given the fact that USP is in flux?
So yeah, we'll look and see if it is, and I think that it also goes to the potency over time.
Okay. Wedgewood 1735.2C, change the prescriber office provisions to expand the conditions under which prescriber office dispensing can be done, and change the definition of reasonable quantity. And I think we probably need, just my belief and just my recommendation, is we need to really look at what the vet industry seems a little different than the human industry, because there is no 503B that's currently allowed for vets. Is there a possibility to review that to see whether, because they either have a choice of just getting from a 503A or a drug manufacturer right now. They don't have that 503B option. Is my understanding correct?
So I think that we want to seek some, although the law states that it applies to human drugs, the question becomes whether or not someone could elect to be regulated in that fashion, in which case it's not necessarily an issue any longer, but we need to have the opportunity to reach out and see if our understanding is.
So a vet compounding pharmacy can apply for 503B and still get that 503B?
That's what we. So if they have a human product, absolutely. They automatically do. What we want to do is sometimes people can allow to elect themselves to be regulated in a fashion, although the law doesn't require it, they could elect to. So we just want to see whether or not that's the case with respect to 503Bs.
Okay. So I think.
Does that complicate or simplify?
I have a public comment.
Yes.
Hi, Rachel Ponticus. I'm on behalf of Wedgett Pharmacy. I just want to clear up, there is a lot of uncertainty about the 503B category for vets, so I just wanted to clarify. 503B cannot make vet products. There are specific exemptions if you think about kind of how it works. 503B is a totally new category of drug producer, and there are exemptions from the Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act for a 503B facility. They're exempt from not CGMP, but they're exempt from new drug approval, and they're specifically exempt only from new human drug approval. So if you look at the statute, a 503B can't do veterinary drugs. There's also a final guidance from FDA. It's called Who Should Register as a 503B Facility. Specifically says only veterinary drugs should not register as a 503B, specifically because all of their vet drugs could be subject to, or should be subject to, the new animal drug approval process. So the only choices for veterinary drugs are pharmacy or a manufacturer. So, and the pharmacy would have to be, if you're looking at it federally, a 503A pharmacy and couldn't be subject to 503B. So that's how the law currently stands in the final FDA guidance.
Thank you.
No problem.
So we can consider that when the staff reviews.
Okay, we'll vet that out.
We'll look at it.
Okay, we can, and just vet it. I'm just concerned that we have options for our vet patients. That's the only, because we actually also do not want to inadvertently move this compounding to the vet office, which cannot do it as competently as a pharmacy. 1735.2D, change regulation to indicate that the prohibitions to compound only apply to human drugs.
I think that goes to the should the drugs be treated differently depending on who the patient is.
Okay. So I think that's all we have for writing. Yes. Jenny, you have a solution for us, right?
I did want to bring up something that you're going to run into. With all the hazardous, we do want to be harmonized with USP Chapter 800. So you've heard lots of comments that want to be harmonized. I want you to keep in mind that if we do harmonize and make the definition including the NIOSH table APIs, then keep in mind that USP Chapter 800 does not go into effect until July 1st, 2018. And if we make it kind of retroactive to, something current, that's going to be problematic for all the people to get the facilities up to speed for those APIs. One of the suggestions to help is, we brought it up, is to allow that assessment of risk through July 1st, 2018. Because USP requires the APIs, you can't do an assessment of risk. You have to follow full containment strategies. Do you follow what I'm saying? We've got a gap there of about a year.
So you're saying that after July 2018, you're in agreement that all Table 1, Table 2, Table 3 drugs should be treated as hazardous?
Absolutely. That would be consistent with 800. The other thought that I had that would help everybody is at the January 4th Enforcement and Compounding Committee meeting, on page 19 of the minutes, this committee voted 5-0 to allow redundant double HEPA filters for non-sterile hazardous, and we all thought that that was law. I understand it's not now. It didn't, but that didn't get brought up to the board meeting on January 24th, 25th. So you have compounders back here that went ahead and invested significant tens of thousands of dollars with redundant HEPA filter to be compliant with USP Chapter 800, thinking that we voted on that, and it's not law.
I think one of the things to be careful of is even if a committee votes it, and
Yeah,
even if
now
the
we
board
learn.
votes it, there's a process that needs to take place for it to be in regulation. But I'll let Ann address this one.
Yeah, so I believe that the board actually at the January meeting did vote to approve the committee's recommendation, but it has to go through the whole rulemaking process.
That's okay, but it wasn't in the January 24th, 25th minutes. So there was three things that were brought up here. Repeal 4127.7 and something about venting and exhausting, but this was not reflected in those minutes. And so when we...
We'll review those minutes, and they're actually just in draft. I mean, we haven't even, have we approved those?
Yeah, the January.
We'll review them again to make sure that they're accurate, but I do recall what Ann states, that we did vote for it at the board meeting.
Okay.
Yeah.
But again, it takes a while for that, even the discussion we had today, for it to
I
be
understand.
in regulation.
And with respect to your timing, the July
Yeah.
date of 2018, even if the board were to move forward with these regs, in all likelihood, it would be July 2018 before the regs would take effect anyway. It takes that long to go through the rulemaking process.
Okay. Could you comment at all on those pharmacies that made the decision to purchase redundant HEPA filters versus venting out?
So I think you're asking for whether there would be any type of
Of accommodation,
yeah,
but despite what our regs say, once you start waiving regs, you lose your ability to really enforce the regs.
Could there be enforcement
I
discretion?
don't know,
I think that's
Well-
an issue for a future agenda.
yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
Better yet.
future agenda item.
Okay,
Thank you, Laura, for keeping us on track. Okay,
thank you very much.
I think that is it for this, for our agenda, unless,
I think that requires a standing ovation to the president of the board.
thank,
And there's one person standing.
yes.
The final word?
Wait, I think John wants to make a comment. Yes.
What do they say? The most dangerous position is between you and lunch. Madam President, I'd just like to make sure I understood, because I think there's some public question about the second motion that was made and adopted by the committee, and that was acceptance of the staff recommendation regarding 1735.2 and the BUDs. I believe verbally what was stated, there was a period placed after non-sterile, and in the written comments, it includes both the non-sterile and sterile components that are in sections 1, 2, and 3.
I was under the impression that we were going to have the staff look at the sterile and have them follow up on that.
So, yeah, yes. So we'll be looking at all of the BUD ones in I-1, 2, and 3.
Thank you.
And then we'll be making recommendations.
Thank you.
So there should be draft language that should come out before the next board meeting. We'll try to get it out with enough time so that you have an opportunity to provide some input.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Meeting adjourned. I know.